Are returning from public session and we're returning from executive session back into public session. Are there any modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, we will continue on with our agenda, and that will bring us to agenda item 4.1, which is public comment. And I believe my colleague, Dr. Tripp, has the list.
First up, this evening, we have Ann Johnson.
I'm the parent of 2 elementary school age children in the district. Okay. Here. Is that good? I am the parent of 2 elementary school age children in the district. My son is a 3rd grader at Cuba Heights. My daughter is in pre-K out at Enfield. I'm just here this evening to show my support for the phone ban that seems likely to be coming down from the governor. As a parent, I would like to see a strict and enforceable phone ban in place by the time my children go to middle school. And all of the parents that I know and talk to in the district, I'm certain would also support a ban. And from what I've read, the most enforceable type of ban would entail installing phone lockers at the front of the school. Kids come in, lock their phone in a little locker, take the key with them. At the end of the day, they retrieve their phone. Anyone caught with their phone out during the school day simply gets it taken up to the front office for the remainder of the day. There's no punishment. It's just the new norm. In March, I happened to visit a friend down in Virginia who has a son in high school, and Virginia has just implemented the phone ban. And his school used the Yonder pouch system. I don't know how much everybody knows about these things, but the kids come to school, put their phone in an individual pouch that has a magnetic lock. The problem with this system seems to be, 1, the phone's still with the kid all day. 2, the kids just don't lock the pouch, or they damage the locks and it doesn't work. But overall, talking to this friend's son, it seemed to be working and successful. The locker system seems to be the most clear-cut and enforceable. Okay. On a different but closely related topic, as a parent, I've also been really surprised at the amount of screen use that's in the actual classroom in elementary school. When my son went to kindergarten, he came home one day and said, "Mom, I have my own iPad." I was actually pretty shocked by this. And again, I don't know of any parents in my friend group that think it's awesome that their kid has their own device in the classroom. This may sound crazy. I would totally be in favor of getting rid of all the student iPads and laptops in the elementary school. May save the district a lot of money. I don't know. And I think there might be a lot of parents besides me who would get behind that. Lastly, as we consider implementing a phone ban, and consider the efficacy of screens as educational tools, I'd really like to have more of a conversation about this. I don't hear much about it. Maybe it's because I don't have middle school or high school students yet. But I'd like to hear more from the district about kids and healthy relationships to technology. I want us to teach them to say, look, hey, the phone ban is here because since 2012, when smartphones became widespread, mental health has been going down, anxiety and depression has been going up. I want to really intentionally teach them friendships and relationships that bring you depth and love and joy in this life can't be found on a phone. I'd like to teach them that unmoderated phone use, it separates us from our body and keeps us up here in the mind, in the ego, where we all become more defensive, more reactive, more anxious, and more attached to our identities than ever before. And I think all we have to do is look around at our country right now and see this. It almost makes me cry.
We're over our 3 minutes, so I
Would you
apologize.
like me to
To
wrap it up?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Okay, so just in conclusion, I'm just a parent here. I'm really in support of seeing the phone ban come down from the state. I think a lot of parents will be behind it. I think it's going to be a really, really great thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Tristan Babcock. How about Tilda Holmgren.
And while we're coming down, a reminder that each speaker gets 3 minutes. If the alarm goes off, I'll do my best to give some space for folks to complete as well.
Hello?
Hello.
It's off? Okay. Sorry. Hello? I am speaking here today as one of a delegation of LACS students in support of our teachers in their upcoming contract negotiations. Our teachers work so hard to provide us a quality education. They go out of their way to help us, staying after school, working off the clock, coaching mock trial, debate, science Olympiad, and various sports teams. They do this out of dedication to their students and to the spread of knowledge. My teachers have inspired me time and time again to reach for the stars. Their dedication matters, their care matters, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for them. ICSD should be holding them in the same regard. The ICSD teacher turnover rate far exceeds the state and national turnover rates. There has been a 26% drop in tenured teachers over the past 10 years, demonstrating the erosion of the veteran workforce. In the past 3 years, there have been 175 non-retirement teacher departures, reinforcing this as a persistent pattern. Nearly half of current ICSD teachers are untenured and lacking job stability. One-third of teachers are stalled on salary trajectory, and more than 3/4 of teachers have been leapfrogged by less experienced colleagues. ICSD consistently overestimates its budget, ending each year with nearly $1 million or more in unspent funds. We have the resources to pay our teachers as much as they deserve, yet despite our financial abundance, we still pay our teachers less than surrounding districts with smaller communities. A strong community of veteran teachers is one of the most valuable things a student can have. Experienced teachers have strong bonds with their community and know their way around. When teachers are constantly replaced, leaving ICSD for districts with better contracts, education suffers. During my time at elementary school, due to bad contracts, we had a new art teacher each year who repeated the last year's curriculum, having no knowledge base for what the class did or didn't know. Starting over at the beginning every year had the impact that I am missing 5 to 9 years of art education. I am now trying to figure out how to get my art credits without taking a class that requires years of a background in basics that I simply do not have. When teachers are not valued and are not treated well, students struggle. We need the school board to understand that we care what happens to our teachers. They are valued members of our community who consistently go above and beyond to ensure that we get a quality education, yet they are underpaid and undervalued. The more teachers are forced to leave in search of a better paying job, the more expensive it is for ICSD in the long run. The harder it is for ICSD to find new teachers, the more blows our community takes, and the more students' education suffers. We need the school board to understand that we care what happens to our teachers. We care about our education, we care about our teachers' welfare, and we are showing up today to let you know that we stand with them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next and last, David Isley.
Certainly not least.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Isley. For a change of pace, I am here as community member David Isley, not school employee David Isley. Because I wanted to bring up something that is like, that's a little bee in my bonnet, and that is the frequency. Oh, now I got to look at my own notes. Yeah. Frequency, length, and timing of executive sessions. Yeah. They happen often. They are long. It forces the community to wait when they are ready to engage in what they should be able to engage with. I have a story about being here 2 weeks ago. Well, not being here, being at home, waiting, staring, looking at the lovely screen. I'm here tonight. I looked at the lovely screen. It was delightful. It wasn't delightful. And I just wanted to come with like 3 asks, pushes. First, I want to recognize the right to hold executive session. It has a strong purpose, and that purpose is to protect the confidentiality of individuals or the district in certain selected situations. So first, my first thing here is just to consider how often those are genuinely needed especially right at the start of a meeting before the content of a meeting is even known. Second, I found myself with extra time recently while looking at a little screen. So I had a friend send me some NISPA protocols. And I know that NISPA allows for the board to collectively decide to provide details about what happened in executive session. And it's a right that I would urge the board to exercise more frequently. Finally, I want to throw it out there. I think seeing a little more debate on the floor would be healthy. You know, be willing to express your views, your individual views. Get messy, disagree, debate, make it ugly, but be open, right? The Ithaca City School District is making these awesome moves towards more transparency with our community, being more open about what we do. And I am urging the Board of Education to follow that model, to be more transparent, to be more open whenever it's possible. It's time to pull back the curtains and open up the windows. Yeah, sure. Curtains pulled back, windows wide open. It could get ugly. We could see things that we don't want to see. But fresh air and sunshine are good for the soul.
Thank you, David. Perfect timing.
Board responses.
The cell phone ban, I mean, I appreciate you coming in and speaking about that. I mean, it's definitely something that, you know, I believe wholeheartedly in. I'm eagerly awaiting, you know, what's going to happen from the governor's office. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to our attention and advocating for it. So thank you.
I appreciate the information you sent us as well. That was helpful. And as we've come to this point several times over the past 6 months at least, we're very much in favor of some form of cell phone ban. We're really kind of waiting for the governor and to come up with the specifics, but I believe it's our joint expectation that there will be something in effect in September.
Emily?
Thank you all for coming. And I completely agree with you. And from a personal perspective, would love to see absolutely no screens in my kids' elementary school. So I understand where you're coming from. The policy committee has been working a lot on the cell phone bans. Even more importantly, the district has been working a lot on collecting information from the community, having community conversations with educators, with students, and other community members. There's also likely going to be an upcoming kind of bigger community forum that the policy committee is working with a couple of the exec team members on. So very much hope that you will plan to come to that, because it's really, really important to us that any policy that's put into place is built with the community and based on feedback that we get from caregivers, from students, from educators, to make sure that it's actually successfully implemented, because we are seeing lots of bans across the country, as you said, some of which have been really successful so far, and some of which have not been at all. And so we want to take care, and the reason that we didn't just jump into doing it right away when we started having these conversations, while I admit part of me wanted to just do that and say, let's get rid of all of them, we know that implementation can be really messy and detrimental if we don't do it thoughtfully. But I think that the discussions so far have indicated that our plan is to have something in place before the fall. And I will say that I have no interest in waiting for the governor to provide any more information. I think that it is up to the district and our community to make those choices. We don't need the governor did research that we already have access to, and we can make our own decisions about that. So I'm very excited to continue that conversation, and definitely encourage you to tune in to policy committee meetings if you want to get kind of more involved in the discussion or kind of hear the timeline, which we are checking in with the exec team about on a regular basis. Tilda, just want to say thank you for being here and for speaking on behalf of your teachers. I'm so glad to hear that they've had such an enormous impact on you, and you're feeling as grateful for them in this district as I am. So thank you for being here. David, so appreciate your comments. Before being on the board, was also like so annoyed by exec sessions and by having to wait. So I totally understand that. I also just admit that I'm new enough that I don't actually know all of the rules about timing and when and how much you can share and how much you can't. So I appreciate you raising that, and also look forward to engaging with my more experienced board colleagues. I just keep looking at Sean because I'm definitely not, yeah. Just kidding, just kidding. Yeah, to be able to learn more about that. I can say that not only do I feel like they're really important, but every time that we leave an exec session, I'm like, man, I wish we could have like 2 to 3 to 4 more hours in here, because there's always so much to talk about. So it makes me very nervous to think that we might not be having them, but I think that it is really important to know that, these are, or not, I know you didn't suggest not having them, but like, cutting back on them. But I think like us being able to hear from you about the need to be as cognizant as we can about the community's needs, and also about the need and desire to hear more from us during general board sessions, I think is really good feedback. So I appreciate you sharing it all.
This is on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add to Emily's comments, David. This board work, I've been doing it 6 years now, and I felt similar to Emily coming on, where it's this attitude like, why are these meetings so long? What's going on in exec? You think something fishy going on in there, and the thing is, when you're on a board like this, you're working collaboratively and building relationships as a team. And saying get messy, like this is not Real Housewives up here. This is us really trying to get work done and be respectful of one another and disagree respectfully and do it for the students. And honestly, last year's process was so brutal. This time last year was really tough. And, I feel like right now I'm really happy that we as a board are communicating, and there's no weird stuff going on behind a curtain. The things that are listed in our agenda, that's what it is. Like, we can't speak publicly about private matters that involve, and I don't have the list up because I'm an absolute chaos mess here, but I mean, what did it say when we go into exec? It lists exactly what we're saying. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And it actually, knowing how much time we put in behind the scenes to do these things and to do it right, frankly, it's a little bit of an insult to hear, this cosplay kind of attitude towards it. We take this work really seriously. And despite sometimes my demeanor behind closed doors with maybe my language, as Karen might like to point out, there might be a lot of F-bombs or whatnot that can't be put here. That's not going to happen out here. But other than that, it's really kind of boring, and it's necessary. And I just want folks to know that there's no smoke and mirrors. There's really not. And I know that I too might have felt that way 6 years ago, but man, it's not. So.
Any other board responses? At the sake of repeating things, I apologize, but I will. But cell phone ban, yes. As an educator, folks may know I was probably the most hesitant on the board to engage in it. First time in my teaching career this semester where I've banned cell phones in my classroom, and completely understand the pedagogical and academic benefits that come from that. I agree that we don't have to wait for the governor, but a bell to bell ban would be much different if it's dictated by the state than do what you want. So part of it is this play. Mary Grover and Carrie Burke are working with Emily and I to create a screening of the documentary Screenagers. There's one for middle school and high school level as well as elementary school level. We're hoping that will be in May to begin the process, and then we're going to be spending the next couple months developing a process, hopefully collaboratively with students. When I was at LACS last week, a bunch of sixth graders gave me an earful about why it wouldn't work. But it was a beautiful conversation to figure out how to work through some of those ideas. And I think most folks understand where the research is. And again, more will happen. And I think it's our hope as a board that this will not be a board policy, but a community policy. Every piece of literature that I've read about this says it only works if there's community buy-in, and particularly from parents and caregivers. Students as well, but so we have to work through that, and that'll be the process. So thank you, and there'll be more to follow. The student's name, I apologize, is it Tilda? Thank you very much. Thank you again for coming to speak. We always appreciate, and I also understand what it takes to speak at a board meeting. Not everyone feels that. Some folks, particular LACS students, are much more eager to speak. Maybe it's all the ACMs. ASMs, excuse me. But thank you. And yes, we absolutely value and care for our teachers, including those of us on the board who have been part of the ITA specifically, or teachers in other areas. So greatly appreciate that. And then I'm going to take the opportunity, because I can. David, you know my great respect for you. And it's respect that has grown over the years of having family in your classroom. So not just the work that you do as a community member, but more importantly, the way in which you approach your pedagogy and your teaching. And so I have great admiration for the way in which you do your work. And I know you didn't come here in that role, but I want to begin by saying that. So I wouldn't respond if I didn't have great respect. I appreciate thinking about executive sessions, and we discuss and debate every single time. Adam and I have a conversation as board officers. Do we need an executive session? We talk with Dr. Brown. We debate about whether or not it's something that could wait for something else. Over the years, executive session has changed to either be in the middle of a meeting at times or at the end of the meeting. Most recently, probably for the past 5 or 6 years, it's been at the beginning of the meeting at board members' request, oftentimes being asked to vote on something that's going to come up in the agenda quite soon. And so there's a conversation, an opportunity to have a conversation, a dialogue about that. So that may not be what you want to hear, but that's sometimes what takes place. And I really appreciate the idea that it can get ugly and it can also get illegal quick. And so part of the idea of executive sessions is to protect the privacy of folks, especially if you're having conversations about the employment history of particular individuals, which is oftentimes the main basis. If we're having conversations about litigation, that's also a main basis. At times it's about negotiations. Right, that's also a main basis. And today was an executive session to have a conversation about the superintendent evaluation. For us, those are not public conversations and protected under open meetings law for that reason. So should we have some additional conversation about when we have executive sessions? Absolutely. But I would dare say, I am going to say this, as someone who I know I've said before, who is the former director of the MLK Scholars Program, who takes students on trips throughout the civil rights belt to have conversations about the way in which democracy works. As someone who taught at LACS, is committed to democratic education, I am completely committed to forms of transparency. I wouldn't be in this seat if I didn't believe in the role of transparency, in particular in what we're seeing today in our political climate at the state and at the federal level. And so I'm saying this to the community. I'm not saying it to an individual. We are committed to helping to lead that very notion of transparency that was talked about during your comments. We have been committed to being transparent. We will continue to be transparent. And as folks who have lived other places know, that New York State is one of the most transparent forms of open government that you're going to find in any state. It requires significant forms of transparency. When community members feel like we're not being transparent, come have a conversation, as I say all the time. But that is something that we are committed to and will remain committed to, being open, available, and transparent. So I appreciate folks speaking, and that was me speaking as a board member, Now I'm going to slide back into the role of being board president. Up next, we have our student reps. And last time you did rock, paper, scissors, we can avoid that. It sounds like you already decided who's going to go first. So why don't we start with LACS?
All right. So since we last met, there was a mock trial competition. On March 29th, the LACS mock trial team beat IHS in the county competition. This is the first time in many years that ACS has won the competition. All of us at ACS, staff, students, and everyone else are very happy for obvious reasons. Next up for the team will be on Thursday, April 24th, when the regional competition will happen at the county courthouse. Yeah, and then in the continuation from the last meeting, I highlighted some fundraisers. I'm going to highlight those again. The Hurricane Helene relief trip is doing some yard work and is selling merch. I believe Miss Tripp or Dr. Tripp has signed up for some yard work.
2 hours of yard work tomorrow.
We encourage you all, whether you're on the board or not, to sign up for yard work. It goes to a great cause. The senior somewhere trip is in full swing and it's been selling merch, water bottles and tumblers. We've sold tumblers to Miss Yearwood and Miss Workman. Thank you both. And 30% of profits raised will be donated to Ukraine. And finally, the Aquasante Freedom School trip launched a GoFundMe. At the last meeting, their GoFundMe was standing at around 49-50%. Today it's at 68%. So they've raised some substantial money since then, all from the support of ICSD and the ACS communities.
I'll just follow that up. Cycle 4 has begun, and so LACS's schedule shifts. So instead of projects on Tuesday afternoons and Thursday mornings, now Thursdays are dedicated trips days, which is just an opportunity for trip groups to continue planning and honing their experience, as well as to just bond as a group, spend some time together, get to know each other better, and to help organize all those fundraising efforts like we spoke about. And then I'll just add again, I'm part of Hurricane Helene Relief. So if you want me to come to your house and do work for you, email Connor.
Science PBATs. Those are in full swing. Presentations are April 25th. The deadline for the second reader was a couple of days ago. So people are hard at work revising their papers at the moment. I'll take a moment to highlight a couple of the proposals that have come through or are going to be discussed at some upcoming ASMs, all school meetings. As most of you know, we do at our school weekly all school meetings in the gym, and we vote on issues brought by anybody within the school community. Some of the big ones recently have been the flag system proposals. So several years ago, I think probably like 6 years ago, it stopped, something like that. We had a system where it was a communication system with parents and the entire sort of support network of students. A yellow flag would be sent home if there was cause for concern, a missing assignment or something like that. A red flag if they were in danger of failing the class, and a green flag if they did something really great. And there's been a lot of discussion, I know, in staff meetings over the past several years to try and bring this back, but it hasn't really led anywhere. And just now a student brought it to ASM. So we had a conversation about that and voted to try to move it forward. Another one has been compulsory voting. That one came out of public education and democracy class led by Bronwyn Exter. And it was very interesting to speak about sort of talking about, the nature of democracy and what's gained and lost by compulsory voting. And the last one that I'll bring up is curriculum requests. So that one's coming up. We're going to discuss that pretty soon. And it's a way for students to make what was before sort of informal, hey, should we talk about this in this class, formal. So I know today a teacher showed me a form that somebody filled out to request an entomology unit in a science class, which would be pretty cool. So all of this is really exciting stuff that hopefully we are going to have a lot of fun speaking about.
I'm gonna add one more proposal because it made me really happy. It recently passed, I think last couple weeks. And that is a like buddy system proposal. So obviously we're a 6th through 12th grade school, and one of our philosophies is intergenerational connections. And in the spirit of that, it was proposed that seniors are given 6th grade buddies for the first 2 weeks of school during our soft start to just kind of help them get the lay of the land. As a senior, I think it's just like really sweet to get someone acclimated to the new environment, and then also to sit with them during ASM to kind of unveil and make the ASM process more clear, because it can be really, really complicated. But yeah, that's been one of my favorite proposals recently, and I'm really excited to see that implemented. That was also from Public Education Democracy. So they've been bringing us a lot of proposals, which has been great.
I wasn't going to bring that one up because it would seem too much like bragging, but I'm going to brag. I helped write it. It was so much fun. I'm really excited.
Good
High
evening,
school.
everybody. As you can see, I'm alone tonight for a variety of reasons, mostly related to sickness and family events. So, well wishes for the numerous board reps who are at home coughing in their beds right now. So, yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that's been coming down the pike recently is, of course, college decisions. So that's been a big deal for a lot of people. And I think today is the last day that almost every major college in America is releasing their decisions. I think it's because it's all supposed to trickle out by the end of the first week of April. So there's that, and that's been a reason for a lot of hectic chaos at our school. But in other news, math team recently just placed 7th in a regional competition. Quiz Bowl Club will be going to nationals in a couple of weeks. The New York City trip for band, orchestra, and choir students will be taking place on April 25th and 26th. And this is a yearly trip that happens that's financed by the Fine and Performing Arts departments. And, we go and see a Broadway production, as well as, in this case, Jazz at Lincoln Center, which I personally am very much looking forward to. We have senior casino night tomorrow, so we'll be competing for a lot of prizes ranging from iPads to guitars. And yes, it's a strange ensemblage. But junior prom has already been announced, as has the senior trip. So the school year is really winding down, which is terrifying for me. And there is also a meeting scheduled for tomorrow to discuss the possibility of a panel of current seniors that would help provide insights on the college and career process during the college and career presentations by counselors, which will be taking place over the coming months. Usually all the juniors are gathered at different times into large auditoriums, and myself and a couple other students brought to the attention of counselors the possibility that, since information is constantly changing on the way you apply, on the job market, on entering the military, right, the reasons to do it or not do it, or the ways in which you go about it may change over time. And so we wanted to provide some student insight from people who have just gone through the process. We thought that it would also, frankly, be easier for a lot of students to listen to, just because I think students have a tendency to care more about what their peers say than what authority figures tell them. So that's something that we're hoping will be able to happen, even if it is a little bit of a logistical nightmare. So there will be a meeting about that tomorrow, and I'll update the board on how that goes. The recycling video that I've been parroting since February, I've received word that it will finally be ready in the next couple days. So fingers crossed. I've maybe heard this before, but fingers crossed. And as soon as it's released, we've already had discussions with Ms. Hardesty, our principal, on broadcasting it to the whole school. and we're going to start the program pretty immediately following that. So hopefully we'll be able to get a good month or two in before the end of the school year and hit the ground running next year if there's somebody to pick up the torch. So a couple other things too, I'll try to be quick. Code Red, our robotics team, competed well at our Tech Valley Regional, but we're sadly met with some technical failures on the second day of competition, which will be fixed next year with more planning and reflection happening post-construction. The Tech Trailers recently hosted Cornell PhD student who gave a great workshop on her current satellite imagery research and her past work with hive-minded drones, essentially drones working together as bees in a hive is my understanding. Two music-related events. The IHS choir students recently had the 10th annual IHS chorale theme concert. Many who came also had their own written pieces that they performed, so that was very impressive. The IHS string and chamber orchestras kicked off April with their performance in our cafeteria, and the IHS band will be doing a performance for second graders around the district on April 24th, I believe is the date. And this has been a couple years running. It's the idea to try to embolden students who in third and fourth grade will begin to choose whether or not they want to pursue instruments and music to see the end results, at least within the high school context or the K to 12 context of their hard work in that regard, especially since we know it can be rather demoralizing when you're having difficulty starting, especially if you don't have the guidance that you think that you might need. And then the last thing that I'd save till last, because I don't really want to talk about it, but more about vapes. So we had a monitoring process for the bathrooms, which students complained about a lot, staff complained about a lot, but at the very least, there were fewer vapes in the bathrooms. Recently, there was one found by administration shoved down a toilet. So I don't know. For me, that brings up some interesting questions about discipline policies that I'm interested in having conversations about. But I think those are probably going to happen first on a micro level for schools and individual students, much of which is probably private information I will not be privy to. But I thought I'd let the board know about that. And then, sorry that I'm going on and on, but I have to very quickly mention the JV, varsity, and modified spring sports rundown. Lacrosse is 3-0. Varsity lacrosse for girls is 1-0. Boys varsity tennis is 3-0. Varsity baseball is 1-1. And this is the first season where all but one stack school has a full varsity and JV girls flag football schedule. So we're very excited about how that sport has proliferated through IHS. Thank you. And sorry you had to hear my voice instead of my illustrious colleagues.
Thank you, Katie. Board responses. Emily, go ahead.
Thank you all for sharing. I have a number of things written down, actually. Maybe I'll just go through all of them, and then if there are any responses, go for it. The first one, no response. Oh, they're not allowed to respond. Are they? You can't respond. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Oh,
No.
sorry.
Just trying to
Thank
get
you.
process down. No,
that's fair.
not at all. Emily.
Okay, you don't have to respond. I thought that the red, yellow, green flag idea is an interesting one and made me ponder, but I'm not going to ask you about it right now. That I know that Canvas, like that families use Canvas to check in on the kinds of things that you just mentioned. I actually don't do that yet because my kids are still in elementary school, but that's what I hear. And so I'm curious, if that tool is not used at LICS, or if students feel like this is like a better system or feels better to them than people logging into Canvas. Maybe we can talk about that offline since you're not allowed to answer the question. Wanted to say just about the college admissions period. One is that it's been very fun to watch on social media the announcements. So thank you to district communications team for posting announcements of where people are going to college with little pictures of them when they were little kids. I think that's adorable. I also know that we've received questions before about college going rates and what schools kids are going to, and there seems to be some different ideas about how many kids are like going to college from the district and other things. I'm wondering if the district shares that information any other way than social media. Is that a social media account that I'm referring to? I mean, sorry, a district account?
I'm unsure which one.
You don't know what I'm talking about? Is that's not a, okay, forget it. Forget everything I just said, other than that I really like that account. That's very cool. And congratulations to everyone who's going. It wasn't mentioned, but I went to the Ithaca High School prom musical. That was awesome. So congratulations to everyone who was in that. Also went to Alice in Wonderland, where a number of students were in that as well. So congratulations to all of you on that. The college and career new process that you're talking about, Kate Mon, I think sounds really cool. And I think that's great for students to hear from other students. I am curious what kind of efforts are being made to diversify the group of students who are going to be talking and sharing their pathways to college admissions. And then finally, correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, but I think at the next facilities meeting, we're going to have a special presentation on vaping from a group of Cornell students who have been doing a lot of advocacy work in New York State and are advocating for a bill at the legislature. And so we're going to be talking about that and offering a solution that the high school may be interested. Yeah, a monitoring solution. So I encourage you to check out the next facilities meeting for that. That's it. I'm done.
Other board responses?
I know. I don't want to tell. It was great though. Had a good time.
We'll set up a lottery and go from there.
Congratulations, Emily, on, you said you wrote the buddy system for LACS and Stella had, shared about it. So thank you all, LACS, for doing that. And it's similar to Caveman, you mentioned about the band, high school band, working with the second graders. And that is such a beautiful program when the all second graders come to Culp Auditorium to look at the big students and see them perform, because it really does engage our students, our elementary students, that they're eager to go into playing an instrument for the next year. So thanks that's continuing, and congratulations to the Code Red Robotics team for going to Albany. And I do have my merch. I had to show it off because LACS is running a fundraiser, and all of these programs are fundraisers for the schools and the programs. When you go to any of the, if you purchase an item or you go to and have the, lawn cleanup and everything, as well as if you go to any of the performances, especially the plays where there's a payment there, that's towards our students and just for our community to continually engage with our students and see what the good work that they're doing.
Usually I let this slide, but I want it on record that I did purchase a Blue Ox t-shirt that cost me more than the $15 that was asked for. So looking forward to supporting that event as well. And Cademan, I hope that we will have your permission when it's done to play the video during a board meeting so it can be seen by everyone else. So if you do not, maybe I should ask you that offline. So we'll follow up and go from there. And if no other board responses, we'll continue on with our agenda. Thank you, student reps. Fantastic. The next agenda item is agenda item 5.1, the consent agenda. And we will entertain motions.
I move to approve all consent agenda items listed in consent agenda, consideration of accounts, personnel reports, students, and minutes of previous meeting as presented.
Moved by Adam, second by Emily by half a second. Any questions, debate, conversation?
But just conversation that there was a correction on the minutes from last month that's noted in here that was already brought forth.
Thank you, Karen. Any additional conversations? Two items of note for me would be, again, additional contribution from Ithaca Public Education Initiative. Thank you, IPEI, and some donations to help our Boynton Middle School students attend the New York State School Music Association music festivals. Thank you for that as well, for those contributions. Hearing no discussion, we'll call the question. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Continuing on with our agenda, Dr. Brown, the superintendent's
Oh,
report.
yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to share at your meeting, Professor and board. Just one item, an announcement, of some local news that's positive that I wish to share. And we need some positive news locally, as I'm sitting here and seeing some negative news coming out locally, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly. But this is a positive one. And I'm going to read this name here because it's a long one. It's the International Technology and Engineering Educators Association, which is a international organization. And for the second consecutive year, they have named Ithaca High School as a STEM School of Excellence. Congratulations, Ithaca High School. And they're receiving that recognition because of the school's continued commitment and achievement with innovation, hands-on learning, excellence in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. Again, I continue to share receipts of the excellence that takes place in our schools and our community every single day. And a shout out to all the educators and the young people who are associated with our wonderful program as we're building and adding on a new physical space for that program. Scott, Akil, Ian, all the great educators there and all the great students. Thank you. And that's a special award. And I'm sure we'll have more conversation about that in the near future. But just wanted to make sure we made that announcement. As we now transition to a very robust conversation about finances and fiscal stability for our community and organization. Thank you, Professor.
Absolutely. Thank you. That will continue on with our agenda, which brings us to one of the main topics this evening. We have a couple of topics. One is the board discussion. The budget discussion. So this would be the board's discussion around budget. We are hoping this is going to be much more of a work session for board members to ask questions, to get a little bit of idea. I know board members have been asking Dr. Brown and his team some questions, and I know you fielded some questions from the community as well. So why don't we begin with some of those questions that you have, and
That'd
then
be awesome.
then we'll open it up to other board members to ask some things.
And again, I will remind folks that you can use the Let's Talk portal. You can send us an email. There are many ways to get in touch with us, public comment. If there are questions that folks have about our budget process and the proposed budget request, please send them to us. I've invited members of the executive team to the table to answer questions the board may have tonight and to answer some questions that have come in to us via the Let's Talk portal. Questions around the use of fund balances and reserves, the overall budget increase, so things we've already received. So we prepared some answers to some of the frequently asked questions. And Karen, this is for you. Each year I go to the communication team and I'm frantic about why isn't the FAQ up yet? And each year they remind me that it doesn't go up until the board adopts a budget, all right? So please make sure next year I don't ask until the board adopts a budget about the frequently asked question. But there will be a frequently asked questions section on our website. And there's already information about the budget development process online now, if folks prefer that medium. But again, we'll, again, as you start to talk, maybe introduce yourselves to the community and to the board for the folks who are watching. But I've asked Dr. Lisi to begin with the answering of some of the questions we've been getting so far.
My apologies for
Yeah.
interrupting, Dr. Brown. I wanted to confirm before I did that. The FAQs from prior budget years do remain. So you may not have an FAQ page or frequently asked questions page for this year's budget, but there is one for the 24-25 last year that is still up on the website, and I would encourage folks to take a look. Am I right about that?
No, I cannot believe I'm about to correct Professor in open live session. All right.
You
I wish this was
absolutely
an
can.
executive session where I could say that's not true. But I don't think that's accurate. That may be the first time in 15 years I'm having to correct you publicly. But let me confirm. Is
Yep,
it?
I apologize. There you go.
So I guess we're both right.
Somehow.
Or both wrong.
No, I'm gonna take two rights, make an even better correct.
Cool. Go ahead, Doctor.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brown. So one of the areas that we continue to get a lot of questions is in regards to our fund balance and reserves. And I think we need further clarification. I wanted to share a little bit more information with you in those areas, particularly how they would impact our budget, not just this year, next year, but for the next 5 years, especially considering some of the issues that we're dealing with, both economically, nationally, and so on. So if I could. So some of the questions that have come up, first question, sort of common sense. How much do we have in fund balance right now? So I want to share that figure. It's a little over $31.5 million in fund balance. The real question is, what is our fund balance? So we use those terms a lot, and I'm not sure that everyone totally understands the difference between fund balance and reserve and how those are split up, how they're used, how they can be used. So I want to try to clear that up as best I can. So some of the questions, what's the difference between them? I just shared that. Why do we have them? And can we use these funds to support things like salary increases or other operational expenses? So I'll start with sort of the least complicated, and that's going to sound funny when you hear that it's reserves, because for a lot of folks, that is a complicated area. But our reserves, for all intents and purposes, are restricted in their use by either law or the Board of Education. And the amount within that fund balance, that $31.5 million that I just mentioned, within that amount, 16.3 million of it is reserves. So what are reserves? Reserves are set aside for very specific uses, and the board decides what those reserves are and the limit by which they are funded. Okay, so they're legally restricted either by law or by the Board of Education. And I'll give you one of the examples, and this one recently came up in a conversation, the capital reserve. You know, one of the questions was, can the capital reserve be used to fund the New York State building aid reduction that we saw? And it's just going to take you a little bit back to the state revenues we talked about, the state aid revenues, where I mentioned that it was great that we saw an increase in foundation aid. It was almost 12%, which was fantastic, really helped us out. But we saw a significant reduction in our building aid. Now, I did mention that there may be a change there when the assembly approves the final state aid runs. But for right now, we have to go by that reduction. And the answer is absolutely not. The capital reserve cannot be used to refund the whatever reductions we see in building aid. Capital reserves are approved by the voters. The board approves them as well. It goes out to the voters, and those funds must be used for what they're voted for, very specifically. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. So I'll move on a little bit to the next area is our fund balance. And we often talk about those in two different types, our unassigned and our assigned fund balance. So if you remember, I'll just go back, our reserves, there was 16.1 million. Those are very restricted and used for certain purposes. Our fund balance total is the remaining amount, 15.2 million. So I'll start with our unassigned fund balance. I'm kind of going from the least complicated to the most. That we're allowed to keep that unassigned fund balance up to 4% of our budget. That's what New York State law allows us to set aside. And very specifically, that is our rainy day savings account for emergencies, for unanticipated expenses. And I just heard, for example, Cornell, $1 billion was just frozen by the federal government. So unfortunate. We've been talking about our federal aid that we receive is between $5 and $6 million. If that's frozen, we still have those costs. So that's the rainy day fund. So the unassigned fund balance at 4% could help us in that emergency. So again, this allows us for cash flow stability, risk management, and most importantly, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, our credit worthiness is exceptionally important as well. And just allow me a moment and I'll walk through the fund balances and then we'll talk more about that. The next one, perhaps the most complicated to conceptualize, is our assigned fund balance. So almost on a yearly basis, we either have expenses that don't come through to fruition, or we have vacancies that we don't fill, we have breakage and so on. So sometimes there's funds that are left over. Those funds are explicitly used to help fund the following year. So they roll over to ease the burden on the voters. They become part of the budget, always with the anticipation that they will be expended, that we will fill those vacancies, or that, we will have those expenses. So they're generally not put into a budget with the idea that we're never going to spend them. I think what you're seeing in this particular fund is during COVID, we received a lot of funds to help with our stability. And so this is sort of the outcome of that, the past few years. So that's why we've had this very healthy assigned fund balance. What I'm about to show you is a 5-year projection, even with these funds currently in our assigned fund balance, and what that will look like, because we're not anticipating another COVID experience with those funds, those extra funds that we might receive. So let me show you what that looks like here. So I want to share a couple of assumptions before I get into this. When we can sort of put together the 5-year projection, a couple of things to keep in mind. The first assumption was that we would continue to see a 3% increase in state aid. We try to be somewhat conservative, but that may not be conservative. It may be flat considering the current situation. But in this projection, 3%. We also considered increases in costs between 2 and 7%. And we looked at it line by line and had in mind, what things like the tariffs, things like inflation rate and so on and so forth. We thought that was reasonable in terms of increases. And we also looked historically to see what our increased costs would be. The other assumptions in here are, we assumed breakage, that we might have that left over on a yearly basis. So we took all those things into account to create this 5-year projection. One of the most important assumptions that we included was the proposed 25-26 ICSD budget included contractual negotiation ranges between 4 and 5%. This actual projection assumes a 5% just to cover all associated costs with those. Okay. So here's the outcomes to keep in mind. For 25-26, you can see very clearly on here that our revenues and expenses, that's where the line crosses. We're fine there, no issues. By 26-27, the assigned fund balance would be reduced by $2 million to balance the budget. Step one. By 27-28, the assigned fund balance would be reduced to $800,000, not by $800,000. By 28-29, both the unassigned and the assigned fund balance will be completely depleted, and there's a potential of having to use reserves to balance the budget. Now, caveat with this. We're supposed to be conservative in our projections, but we took into account that over the next 2 years, we would be able to shift and potentially plan for that cliff. So it's not that the sky's falling. It's just a case of, look, this is what we're looking at more realistically for a projection. So I'm going to stop here and pause and see if there's any questions.
And if I can add one more caveat. The last time we used that notion of the lines crossing was in a board meeting, and we talked about the lines crossing as we were negotiating the last 6-year contracts. And we mentioned at the time, I got to keep reminding folks, I mentioned that to live in this world of 4 and 5% increases when our revenue is increasing only by 2%, at some point we're going to have to entertain going over the tax cap or make significant reductions to staff. I will say that again. If we're looking at 4 and 5% increases to compensation and other inflationary costs, and we're funded very aggressively, I may add now, at 3%. And we've been here where we've been funded at flat rates, or there's been a gap elimination adjustment where we've received less funding from year in year. At some point, we got to have a conversation about what we do. A reduction in force, consolidations, other cost savings. The last time we had this conversation, we moved to our healthcare approach, providing benefits and healthcare in-house, which gave us significant savings. We changed our investment strategy, and that worked out well. I can't speak to our investment strategy continuing to work out well based on what's happened the last month. So there's a lot we would need to talk about, but 4 years gives us some time to plan. So again, the sky's not falling, but I'm saying, I want to go on record by saying the lines are crossing, y'all, and we need to have some tough conversations about what to do next.
One additional point to an assumption I didn't mention is this also assumes a 3% tax cap over that every single year for the next 5 years. Now that's an assumption, not a prediction. So.
I feel like this is a really good time to pause. And I mean, Tilda, I think you're still here. You asked earlier, and I think this is saying, we have millions in reserves, and we have these conversations as board members. But I just want to kind of ask you, knowing the answer. I mean, when we say we have all this money in reserves, we truly don't. I mean, preparing for the worst, seeing the news that just broke about, funding cut and the federal climate we're looking at with funds being cut, I mean, dipping into our fund balance at all for anything right now as a board feels fiscally responsible or irresponsible. And I just want to be clear, like when we're talking about climate and sky is falling, I mean, this is one of those occasions where we really want to make sure our reserves are robust because we really, it's more unpredictable than ever. Am I?
Yeah, I don't want my responses to be anecdotal or emotive. I want to just make sure that I'm sharing the facts with you. And I think that's correct. It's correct to say that, first of all, those reserves are there for a reason, and they were created for a reason, and they're funded appropriately. And quite frankly, I think I just argued in the finance committee that they may be underfunded looking ahead. So your comments well taken.
Thanks.
I guess I have a question. So we're sort of talking about budgeting 4 to 5% salary increases in terms of ITA. And then ITA is proposing a plan that they say would cost us another 1.1 million, which they had sort of talked about and suggested maybe we draw from reserves or fund balance. And I'm just wondering, what would that look like if we granted that and we're talking about those kinds of numbers?
I don't know that I can intelligently speak to the $1.1 million. I don't know. I don't know where that's derived from, quite frankly. Our costs are real salary costs based on what we can predict and using the 5% as our number. The 1.1 is.
I have some thoughts. For every 1% on the payroll for Ithaca Teacher Association, for example, is around $415,000. The proposals that are very public, when comparing the two most recent ones, although there are no proposals from us on the table at the moment, because they've been rejected. But the last one that was on the table was around 4.5% increases. And the counter proposal was 7.5%. So if you think about that 3% at $400,000 times 3, maybe that is where the $1.1 million. But I got to remind, that would be, if we're talking about a 2, 3, or 4 year deal, that 1.1 million would need to be compounded. And that 1.1 grows to 1.6 in year 2, and then closer to $2 million in year. Well, maybe that's a little aggressive, but it grows pretty quickly. But it's not. Again, I'm not attempting to speak about where a number is coming from somebody else. But when I'm thinking about a difference between the proposals that have been submitted, I see about a $1 million difference immediately. And I'm thinking about the compounding approaches to that as well. And you're seeing that all of those are going to our fund balances. And we probably could show projections where we would get into our reserves in year 2 or 3 with that kind of a settlement to compensation.
This actually shows 5% settlement over 4 years.
And we're already getting it
we're
through.
already there. So there's other impacts as well. And I want to share that with you in terms of our bond rating, what that would look like if we start to chip away at our fund balances and our reserves. That has a direct impact on our credit rating. And we have some real numbers I'd like to share with you. So here's an example. We're currently rated at AA-. That's an excellent rating. We receive great rates on our bonds. So a little bit of history with that. So when we go out for, let's say, our capital projects, we bond for that. It's kind of like analogous to a mortgage, right? And we try to get the best interest rate we can, and that rating plays the most important part, obviously, in doing that. So what happens then if we start to spend our fund balance and reserves? One of the first impacts is it can degrade our rating. And I just want to show you what the financial impact of that is if that should occur. So we'll base this on the current bond we have. It's $120 million, and I think it is amortized over 20 years. So we can all relate to that with mortgages and so on. Here's some real numbers. So if we use our fund balance, just the fund balance alone, it could have an impact of dropping our rate to A+. So AA- to A+ is one drop, okay? That would have a real cost of $1.9 million. Granted, amortized over 20 years, but that's real cost for us. So that would change our debt limit expense that we pay every year and might actually drive us over the 7% limit that we have imposed internally. One more drop to an A would cost 1.9 million over 20. I'm sorry, 3.2 million over those 20 years, and so on. The next drop, 4.5 million. And in real speak, if we start to really chip into our reserves and fund balance and reserves and we deplete those, it isn't going to be just a one grade drop. We're going to significantly drop. So all of these decisions have a long-term legacy financial cost.
We should pause here, y'all. Because this is a slide and a talking point that superintendents and business officials all of our state are grappling with. And we've been fortunate to be able to build our reserves over the last decade, to improve our credit rating, to be able to achieve savings. I know of colleagues whose credit rating has dropped in the last year or two, and they're really struggling. I just want to make sure everybody understands, because we don't talk about, and when I say that our numbers and our finances are being scrutinized by external partners, including fiscal advisors who looks at hundreds of school districts all over the state, it's just not Louvel and this board, which has a lot of experience here talking about this. We have a lot of folks looking at our finances and giving us recommendations, and they've told us, be careful about using your fund balances because your rating is going to be impacted significantly. And I'm sitting on another board where that's happened.
When you say use our fund balance, how much of the fund balance would we have to use for it to impact our rating?
That's a great question. It really depends on our overall financial picture, but the moment you start dipping into that, it can have an impact. So it's a complex rating system. That is a important part of it. So what I can tell you is that significant impact if you're using both fund balances. If they're dipped into and you no longer have them, that's going to have a significant impact. The moment you start dipping into reserves, that will have a much greater impact.
It's a proprietary algorithm. I wish I had it because it's worth billions, but they do make that decision. And sometimes I feel like it's arbitrary, but sometimes it's very real.
So, per New York state law, we have to have 4% of the fund balance of the following year, but that's the unassigned.
No more than 4%.
More than 4%.
No more than 4%.
No more than 4%. We have to keep it at.
And I will tell you, a lot of small school, like we're referred to as small city school districts around the state, argue that that's nowhere near enough as a reserve for emergencies. But by law, we can only go up to 4%.
This is a note of point of information for the community. At the November 19th Joint Facilities and Finance Committee, members of fiscal advisors came and spoke both about our capital projects as well as our financial and fiscal rating. And so I'd encourage the community to go back to the November 19th meeting to watch that or participate in that conversation about some of the dialogues we were having, particularly about long-term financial planning, including investment strategies, what buildings may we do work in that would actually be the most cost efficient while still maintaining the building condition survey, you name it. It was for me, a very informative meeting, and I'd been on the board for a long time, but that meeting was quite good. So again, November 19th, 2024, I recommend folks go take a look.
Any more slides? Those are all the slides we have. We're open. Again, those are the questions we've been getting most frequently. And thanks for the opportunity to clarify and answer some of those. But we look forward to any other questions you have as we anticipate in needing the board to adopt a budget in the coming weeks as we still continue to develop it.
Dr. Brown and team, one of the things that we've been talking about all year, and I feel like this question has been answered by the news, but hoping that we could get more from Cornell contributing. I mean, given any conversations you've had, I mean, is it null based on what we've just read, or like where are we at with that?
Yeah, Professor Bradwell, Dr. Blaylock, we have received confirmation from the president and his team. They do wish to meet with us in June. I think it's late June, June 16th, if I'm not mistaken. I hate to put out a date publicly, but it is a June meeting, was the first available time, and having had some conversation with them, they are grappling with a lot of fiscal uncertainties right now. Just want everybody to know that, particularly news now, us going up and asking for a significant amount of an increase to a voluntary contribution, the timing may not be good, but we're going to ask anyway.
And by that, again, it was referenced, some folks may know, but an announcement came out today that about $1 billion worth of grant funding will be withheld from Cornell at this point in time. So that's news that broke earlier today. And I'm going to break precedent and not speak as a board member, but not speak as board president, but speak as a board member, particularly because for me, the conversation about Cornell contributions are complex. Let me be exceptionally clear that I support additional funds from Cornell and recognize the need for additional funds from Cornell. And I also want to put on the record to make sure we're having an intelligent, informed conversation. For me, the conversations around Cornell, given the fact that they are a significant property owner and don't pay their fair share of taxes, makes me uncomfortable for a couple of reasons. One, as a historian, going back, we've had no conversation about the Dawes Act, the Doctrine of Discovery, or the Morrill Act, which allows Cornell to be New York State's land grant institution and not even giving any recognition to the folks who were on this land originally. People don't want to even entertain that conversation. That part I understand, but for me, I feel I at least have to give some voice to it. Second, as a educational institution, to anticipate and or expect folks to pay taxes really goes against the very idea of being an educational institution. And I'm wondering where we draw the line in that regard, because there are other not-for-profits which also have significant holdings that are not taxable. And are we going to be then looking for churches to pay additional funds, for other educational institutions to be paying additional funds? You name it. And so for me, that is not the approach that I want to take. And so I want to put this publicly and have it on the record. My understanding of the sizable increase that Cornell has given to the city was in large part given for use of services. It was not about being tax exempt. It was Cornell's recognition, oh, we use your roads, we use your fire department, we use your sewer, we use all these things, and therefore the additional fund should be for use of services. To my board colleagues, I would humbly recommend that that be the approach that we take. Is not about property tax, because I do believe as a educational institution, they have the legal right to be tax exempt as one board member. I do believe that Cornell uses ICSD services, and therefore we should be thinking about what is the appropriate compensation based upon those services and or mutually beneficial partnerships and collaborations. Dr. Blaylock and I have had this conversation. I've had it with other board members as well. As someone who also recruits faculty and high-level folks to both Ithaca College and Cornell, the number one question that I am asked is about the school district and what school should I go to. So it is in everyone's best interest to have a thriving, well-funded public school system. And so that's the approach that I would recommend that we take, again, as one board member. I've been waiting to say that for some time and figured I would take tonight to make that argument, because I think it's going to have a lot of bearing on what happens, not just in this budget season, but budget seasons moving forward. My apologies. I'm back into the presidential role. Other conversations, comments, discussions.
I concur.
Cornell's the third largest taxpayer on our roll.
Cornell is the third largest taxpayer in Tompkins County, according to the Tompkins County Assessment Office. So Cornell does pay taxes. And for me, it's not about Cornell. I'm not trying to protect Cornell. For me, it's the idea, like, who's next? Are we going after INHS next, given their property holdings? I want to focus on something that for me has merit to it, but I already said too much, and I'm quite certain I'm going to see my name somewhere, someplace.
And can we go back, the slide with the graphs about, funds and, the lines
crossing.
that, yes, thank you. Thanks for laughing at me. Maybe we can go Real Housewives tonight. No, but in all seriousness, we don't want to go over the tax cap, right? And I feel like we've had this conversation so many times over my tenure here, but how can we as a school district have enough money to give our students, our employees, everybody what they need and deserve? I mean, I know as a board, we have RFPs out, we're exploring every avenue possible, but what can we do?
And I would offer that we continue the work of governance and efficiency seeking that we've always done. There was a time when there were many more schools in this community than we have now. At some point, a board of education and community decided to consolidate. There were smaller class sizes at some point. We and others have decided to raise them. At times, we decided to make them smaller, course offerings. we're going to continue to try to find levers and innovative approaches to increasing revenue and decreasing expenditures, even though we know expenditures are typically going to increase. And we're proposing a budget of $168 million at around $24,000 per student. I must say this on behalf of all my colleagues and my family, that this is a privileged conversation to be having in a high tax state with that much money and that much money per student, per pupil. We're coming from a state where the per pupil expenditure is around 9,000. We're coming from a state where the average class size is 28, 29. And they're meeting the needs of their learners. Our taxes are unsustainable, as you said to me my first day on the job. And our community is expecting more. And we have been delivering on it. So this is just an ongoing conversation, irrespective of who's going to be at this table. This is what's going to happen in this community for the next couple of generations. And I see it as healthy. And it's a challenge. And if we can't figure it out, we can't figure it out, who's going to figure it out? That's the challenge before us. And that's what excites us. And we're meeting the needs of our learners. We have one of the best school districts in our nation, period, by any academic indicator you want to put in front of me. I brought my data portfolio. So we're doing it. It's just challenging. We've survived a pandemic. We've survived an economic recession. We've survived a gap elimination adjustment. We've survived flat aid, state aid increase, all during the time I've been sitting in the seat. So we would do it. Who would have ever thought we would have been self-insured with the health insurance when we were in a consortium and the rates were going up 10, 15, 16% a year? Remember that? We went self-insured and we didn't add a whole bunch of people to this table. And now we're managing a $29 million, I could argue a $40 million health entity. It's possible.
Just to circle back to the fund balance. So what I'm hearing from you is that there are real implications financially to, a downgrading for our credit rating.
Correct.
And that's obviously going to impact the budget year over year if we get downgraded.
Yep.
The other thing that I'm seeing here too is that we're based on a 5% annual increase, we're going to start to deplete those funds anyway.
Correct. Right.
So, I mean, yeah, because I am hearing from a lot of community members that, currently we have these fund balances. Why can't we use them?
Right.
What I'm hearing is it's not as rosy as everyone thinks. And we are heading towards a potential crisis.
Sure.
I mean, the sky's not falling today because we have that money, but the trajectory that we're on, 5% annual increase. And electricity is going up. We're projecting 10% a year.
Correct.
For, electricity costs, healthcare, what did we say, 8%? So, even if we're doing a 5% raise to teachers, we have other variables that are going up at a much higher rate. So I think even 5% is aggressive. So I think it's important to note that, and I appreciate you, quantifying and showing us what it actually looks like on a dollar basis on what it's going to cost us on the budget going forward. But I think that's a really important thing to consider. I on the record, I have a lot of concern too about, what's happening in the current political climate. I'm concerned about what's happening in, with the economic climate. People are already struggling to afford houses in this community. Raising taxes is just going to make it harder. And, potentially losing federal funds. That's our rainy day fund right there. So to me, I kind of agree with you that we don't have a lot of money set aside. It is kind of scary. So that's just my personal opinion. I don't know what the answer is, but I do appreciate you, articulating it in a way that I felt was very clear and concise. So thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of reserves, Professor, you can spend it fast or spend it slow, but once it's gone, it ain't no more. The number of people who've approached me the last week thinking that we can fund recurring operational costs with the one-time funds is alarming to me. And I've been here when we've been labeled as a fiscally stressed school district when we dipped into our reserves to survive a global recession. I don't want us to be there no more. All right. So that's why I'm so adamant about being careful about dipping into those, because it's been hard to get them back to a healthy place. And I don't think I was as adamant before about once we spend it, you can't replenish it.
I mean, and again, I know there's no crystal ball, but it's becoming more and more clear that the price of everything is going to start to rise fairly dramatically. And so, I mean, we are going to likely have to dip into reserves just to function as a district daily between like every single cost that we have. Am I like,
I mean, the unfortunate reality is that's exactly why we have these, and I'll say this again, the budgeting that's taken place for the past decade has been fantastic and prepared us for what's coming. And so, yes, that's probably accurate.
I guess this is the question to Dr. Brown, this team and fellow board members. Given some of the economic realities that we know and we've been talking about at finance for a number of meetings, and while I'm not able to attend, I do watch every meeting. Why at some point in time are we not considering going over the tax cap? And I'm asking everybody, not.
That's a fascinating question for the person who proposed to going over it last year and whose picture was on the front page of the local paper for that reason. And at the time saying we need to do this if we wish to pay our employees at a rate that everyone at the table, at this table, because we're all pro-educator, pro-employee, we need to pay our people more. In order to do that, we needed to exceed the cap to reset our tax base, to be able to do this in a sustainable way for years. I said that, and I will continue to say it. The community didn't think that was a good idea. And so we had to rethink our approach here. So if we're going to continue to provide compensation increases at 4 and 5 or higher percent, that range, we can't do it without raising our levy more than 3. If that makes, I'm trying to be as simple as I can now, and not to be vilified. It's math. So we should be considering, and I've said that for 15 years. When to do it, how much to do it is the conversation and direction the board must and the community must give.
Yeah, and I would say, to answer that question, I think we're not talking about raising the tax cap because we're responding to what we heard last year from the community. Not a lot of time has passed. It doesn't seem like appetites have changed, in 1 year. So that I think that answers that question for me. The only other thing, not to be hawkish or anything, but it's like we're talking about the only option, if funding gets tight is to dip into the funds balance. I guess, there are other options, which is that we can make cuts. Obviously, that's more painful and we don't want to make cuts. But it's not like the only thing we could do is dip into the funds balance. We can talk about other things, and that's why we have the RFPs out. And we are looking into other ways to see if we can save some money too. So I think I'm just putting out there that there's that side as well.
Thank you.
Adam, I appreciate that. And that's partly, my question is sort of twofold. One is sort of not the thought exercise, the reality of thinking about what does it mean to exceed the tax cap. Last year, again, as the wannabe historian that I am, was I don't think that I've seen a vote like that across the state in quite some time with that level of numbers in terms of rejection of a budget. And then what it also means that we have not had a conversation about is that we did make cuts this year. We did cut programs. We did make changes to the ways in which our schools operate and the number of personnel that are there. And so we're already operating from making some significant reductions from last year to this year, and then trying to, and I heard you on the radio this morning, Dr. Brown, saying that while you don't like the term, still using it because it helps people understand that we're talking about, in essence, a rollover budget, keeping all the programs that we have this year in place for next year, rolling over. And even that in itself will have an increase in costs, right? And so I'm also trying to reconcile all these ideas. We made sizable cuts. We continue to make more cuts in administration, and this budget is being proposed in administrative costs, and this budget is being proposed. And we still are finding ourselves in some difficult situations. And so I'm honestly, I'm not lying. I'm taking David's advice of talking out loud and putting some things out there. Like, what does this then look like for us? Right. That's sort of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm apprehensive about proposing something to go over the tax cap. I don't think anything has changed. I mean, to Adam's point, I think if anything, people are probably a lot more concerned about their personal finances and being able to actually pay their taxes. I mean, all the economic indicators are heading, that we're heading into a recession. You have tariffs that are going to drive up, household costs for every single American. People are going to have less discretionary income. I don't know how you can go to them and say, oh, we need you to pay more taxes right now. Like that to me, I'm concerned that there's a lot of concern around that. So that's my personal opinion. That's, again, speaking out loud and open for debate and discussion. And I don't see it happening, but I don't know.
I want to use this opportunity to also just underscore the fact that we are just 8 people up here plus, district officials who are guessing about just that. Like, I so desperately wish that we were able to just go talk to every community member across the district and ask them that, because I have no idea. I have been at a few PTA meetings recently where families have said, I would totally go over to pay more to go over the tax cap if it was going to go to this, or if you guaranteed that we were going to be paying teachers more. People have said that, but few enough people have said that it sure didn't make me feel like, well, I'm just going to advocate for a higher budget and risk exactly happening what happened last year. But that's partially because I hear so infrequently from the community. And if we were being inundated with messages and emails right now saying, listen, we're ready to go back over the tax cap. We want to reinvest in our schools. We want our programs back. But I'm not receiving those messages. And
Well, now.
I'm sorry.
I said you will
I
now.
would love to. I mean, I would love, it's really hard to be making a decision based on what we think people might be afraid to do or want to do or not want to do. So yeah, we are having to take direction from a vote that happened a year ago under unique circumstances, and with a lot of people feeling like they didn't have the information that they felt like they needed about what might be cut and what might not be cut. There's lots of feelings about, I wish I had known. And so now here we are again. And a part of me wants to say well, now that I just have no idea. And I guess I just want to take the opportunity to voice how helpless that feels when we need to be making this decision on behalf of an entire community. And we don't have a really good means with which to really take a strong pulse of exactly where the community is.
May I clarify some things too, Professor? Because I want to make the clear.
I just want to put a slight, I agree with almost all that was said. For me, the unique situation was much less about what would be cut and what would not be cut, because anytime you don't pass a budget, that's going to take place. I think we have to acknowledge the unique position that our community found ourselves in, where the average housing price going up 20, 25, 30% in assessments is a significant shock to the system. And so for me, it's much less about the program. Many people are concerned about the programmatics. I get that. And that significant change in assessment, I think, was jarring for a lot of folks. And then lastly, what I will say is you are correct. We are up here making, I would dare say, an educated guess, not an assumption. But our job as elected board members is to inform ourselves with the data that's available and then make informed decisions. It may not be the easiest. It may not be the best. Neighbors may not like what we do, but that's the reason why folks run for a school board, to be in a position to make these decisions. And so it may not feel good all the time. And again, trust me, after 16 years of serving, plenty of people have expressed to me their displeasure. But the reality is that's why we spend time going to meetings, having discussions, you name it. And so it is our job to come up with an informed decision to help the community steward. I think, as Jill said recently, which I really appreciated, to remind ourselves that it's not our money, right? I hope I could share that, Jill, that you said that, right? That, we're talking about the community's money, and our job is to be stewards of that community money. And so here we find ourselves in a tough position to be stewards of the community's money, making educated, informed decisions based upon data and fact.
Professor, I think I was answering the question I was answering from you was if I thought at some point we needed to go over the cap. Not this year. I just want to underscore, we are not proposing a budget this year that's going over the cap. We are proposing a budget that goes to the cap at 3.79%. And we are thinking that the next couple of years, via the RFP, through an analysis, that we take some time to figure out a longer term strategy to be sustainable and offer significant pay increases. You can't fix an issue that's been brewing for decades over the course of 1 or 2 years. But I think we need 1 or 2 years to start to plan for how we will fix this and getting a sense, and hopefully things will stabilize social politically. I just felt like that conversation was as if we were proposing a cap overriding of the cap this year. We're not doing that this year, and I don't anticipate doing it next year either, just for the record.
And I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to go over the cap. But knowing that if we continue with the rollover budget as recommended, that, and as we get to the RFP by the end of this year and look at future other items on our list, that these lines, the projected revenue and expenditures may come closer. We would only hope, but we're in a national climate that tells me that what we need to do at this rollover budget. We know that Medicaid might be affected, Social Security, and within a school district, we do deal with some students that have, and families that have Medicaid. With the tariffs and even from our recent activities across the nation this past weekend with the different protests, that we have to proceed with caution and we have to continue to do our fiduciary responsibilities. There was mention of that we did survive the pandemic and we had COVID funds. That was limited funds for that time, and we no longer have COVID funds, yet there were certain things that continued on that we may have tapped into some funds to fulfill that obligation. And I heard a term this evening, financial abundance, and I really hope with our explanation of the reserves funds and the fund balance that we show that there is no financial abundance, but there are a lot of restricted areas that we cannot tap into because they're restricted, like for capital expenditures or for health insurance. So we have to have some rainy day funds, as Dr. Lisi had explained to us, but yet we have to proceed with caution when we're looking to the future of what we need to do as a school district and making sure that we follow all obligations that we're obligated to fulfill, like all of our collective bargaining units. So I am definitely in favor of us proceeding with a rollover budget.
I'm being mindful of time, but also want to make sure I do not stop the conversation. Dr. Blaylock.
Well, I've been quiet only because I agree. I think we have a consensus. I would say, Dr. Bradwell, I mean, economists talk about exogenous shocks. That's the term we use. The assessments last year is a classic definition of an exogenous shock, something coming from outside that people just didn't see. And you're right, that put us on this course. To borrow Dr. Brown's language, it was clear after last year that the lines were going to cross soon. We saw that coming already. And then on top of that, there's potentially this second exogenous shock of what's occurring at the national level. We don't know, none of us in the room know how real that is. We can only guess. But it's certainly a concern. And so what I would say, my view is just a little bit more optimistic. And being relatively new to the board on my second year, I sit here in reflection and look to my colleagues who've been on the board longer and thank them for having put us in a position to be well prepared to handle this. The fact that we can take 2 years, run a study, look at our operations and try to figure out a way to reduce costs and increase service quality and do that in a careful, calculated manner while we're under 2 shocks potentially, I think is a credit to the financial stewardship of board members who've been on here longer. So I thank them for that, because it could be a lot worse. I think we're in a good position. Sorry, a little bit of cough. Sorry, Zach, could you maybe just quickly update on the RFP? We've made a little bit of progress on that to the extent you want to share.
Oh, sure, yes. So the RFP was out in March. We received responses. We've been vetting those responses, and we are in beginning contact with the group that scored the highest on our rubric that we had on the RFP. So we're going to have meetings with them. We'll have follow-ups. Our hope would be that we can come back to the board later in the spring with a contract agreement for you all to approve for us to engage in, their services.
Yeah, I mean, I will share that I've read the proposals and I feel very good about the potential to do what we need to do. But I'm going to borrow one more expression from Dr. Brown. He says, "That's the work." I mean, that's the work. That's going to be the work for the next year or two. We see it. It's in front of us.
Any other board member comments, questions, responses? This is sort of our last work session. Next week, the district will be on break. We come back on April 22nd, and we'll be holding a special board meeting for the budget adoption. So want to make sure, as well as the BOCES budget adoption on that evening as well. Want to make sure that all board members, between finance committees, between this committee, our meeting here, feel like they have their questions answered or posed, or if there's additional information that is needed, we can still have additional debate and dialogue on the 22nd. But again, just want to set the stage for where we're headed.
Well, a question to continue the discussion on the 22nd. What was brought up at our finance committee, Fine Arts presented their budget, and a question was asked is where would the total be for the budget that we're presenting to the community to vote on? What's the total of the fine arts and where is it embedded? Is it the function code budget that we're voting on?
Yes.
And
Yes, essentially. Thank you for that question. So the function code budget, that's our line by line budget. Effectively, that is online and can be reviewed. So that has all of that detailed information.
Anything else, board colleagues? All right. Thank you, team members. Thank you, board colleagues, for engaging in the conversation. Again, in the meantime, do send questions. We will bring it back on April 22nd. If that's the case, we'll continue on with our agenda, which brings us to agenda item 11.2, the appointment of election inspectors, and we will entertain motions.
I move to appoint election inspectors for the 2025 annual budget vote and election.
Moved by Adam, second by Jill. Any discussion, debate, dialogue? Is that what I said? Moved by Adam, second by Jill. That's what I should have said. All right, hearing none, all in favor? The motion passes unanimously. We'll go on to agenda item 11.3, and this is the 2025-2026 academic calendar. We can entertain motions and then have discussion and debate about it.
I move to adopt the 2025-2026 academic calendar as presented.
Moved by Adam, seconded by Jill. Discussion, conversation, questions? Dr. Tripp.
Sent out sort of condensed version of comments that have been received.
I used artificial intelligence to do that labor for me. I want it on record. I used, I'm not supporting, but I used Copilot to give me a summary of the key suggestions, recommendations, feedback that we received. It did look accurate when I went through and read all the individual comments.
other schedules in the area, but does our schedule in any sense coincide with neighboring school districts and or Cornell? That seemed to be, that's always a major issue.
Absolutely.
Thank you for asking. Yes, this year or I should say for the academic 25-26 year, the winter break in February, as well as the spring break, do align with Cornell's calendar. That happens every so often, and that is the case. If I want to back up on the timeline, so we have roughly 275 students who attend BOCES. So all of the component districts defer to the BOCES calendar so that our students are not missing that programming. And there is a collective conversation on components of the calendar for it to be in line with educational minutes as required by New York State law. That starts the conversation. So your question about component districts, our calendar is in line with other component districts as far as the breaks, with some exceptions that some component districts may give longer, for example, the week of Thanksgiving break, because their educational day allows them to have more days off. We have holidays, shared holidays that are honored with both the BOCES calendar and other component districts. Our flexibility is solely caregiver conference days.
Other questions folks may have?
So I have to thank all of those who took advantage of the Let's Talk. And I didn't look at the AI generated one. I read all of the Let's Talk and the two areas that really came up that people are asking for. Is it possible to extend the winter break to start that early, 2 days prior, starting December 22nd
Second and 23rd.
And then another popular one was, instead of us having the spring break the last week in March, to have it the first week in April. The reason being, quite a few people stated how it's currently how the calendar is situated, that it would be too long a period between April 6th to June 26th, I think, or June 25th. So they were asking for some breaks in between there. Although we do have 2 holidays in between there. We have Memorial and Juneteenth. But they wanted, instead of the February break, someone had requested that we eliminate or reduce the February break, which no. But there's too many breaks between like the February break and the spring break. So to have the spring break start April 6th. But before I said that, I should have asked if you saw all of the Let's Talk in the design of the calendar. Any comments? And
Yes,
feedback?
I did. And I also appreciate the summary that I was CC'd on. Thank you. So I'll start first. If we were to move our spring break to the week of April 6th, we would be out of sync with our BOCES calendar, thereby denying, I want to be very clear, denying 275 students their educational programming for that week. So I am not recommending that shift. I hear it. I hear school, seven weeks, consecutive weeks of schooling is a shift, when up until that point, we have, if we were to look on the calendar, 2 consecutive week chunks. That to go from 2 weeks as the longest stretch to then 7 is a shift in cadence.
Well said.
You know, the irony for me always, and I get it, because we were just talking about Cornell, and it is the largest employer, but it's fascinating to me that there's always a request to make sure our spring break lines up with Cornell spring break. There is never the ask that it lines up with Ithaca College spring break. But that's my own personal preference.
It does not.
It does not.
After everything
But I also want to remind folks is that oftentimes spring breaks do not include staff. And so the request is usually coming from faculty who have that time off. Most staff continue working during those spring breaks as well. And so it's always an interesting ask. And so this one, even though Karen, I read the same thing you read, like people are asking for a change. And at the same point in time, you can't have it both line up with Cornell spring break, what it does this year, and then also ask for us to move it. Like, you know, we're not going to appease everyone. And I do remember Dr. Brown saying repeatedly that you have yet to see a perfect calendar where everyone is happy. And I also want to recognize the amount of time, labor, energy, thought, ingenuity, innovation that has gone into our calendar to be responsive to what students have been coming to us for years of asking us to have a calendar that is reflective of the variety of students in our school district. And we've worked hard to do that in various places. So where some folks see it as random days off at various times, that was much more intentional of a response to student requests. It may not work for everybody. That part I understand, but I'm glad that we made the attempt to be responsive in that way. And there are times where it's disruptive to my household. Like, what do you mean there's no school tomorrow, right? And then I have to recognize what we're doing and why we're having that recess day. So I am thankful. I realize that whatever we do, not everyone is going to be happy, but it does seem like we've tried to be responsive to some of the feedback. The only thing that I do have questions about is that December 22nd and 23rd dates, but I also realize that that's disruptive on either other end, either the beginning of the year or the end of the year, and that'd be very difficult to do contractually speaking and with New York State requirements. So I thank you for the work, Mary. I see where we're at.
Yes, thank you. I do want to be on record and be very clear with the community that if we were to not have school in session for students on the 22nd and 23rd, we would need to make up those instructional minutes. To date, we have our calendar going through June, with the last day of school for students being the 25th. That would extend the school year a couple of days.
Mary, I have one question that I'm just going to read the query because I know that we can't address it, nor would I ever propose us excluding students who use both these programs. But it's a good point that I think you can address as your role. Elementary teachers have begun a new system of M-class academic supports for students struggling with reading. These intervention groups require a 6-week cycle that includes assessments. The proposed calendar only provides 5 weeks between February break and spring break. If spring break were 1 week later, that would allow for full intervention cycle. I just wonder how, you know, as instructionally speaking, that can be addressed.
It's a valid concern, and I would say we're going to be leaning on and problem solving. When you miss a week of instruction, the consecutive 6-week cycle, you have to pick up where you stopped. So that's going to be interrupted throughout the calendar year when we have any day off. So a 6-week cycle would no longer, it would not be that the 6 weeks uninterrupted. It would moving spring break wouldn't change. By moving spring break, it's 6 weeks interrupted. I can appreciate that and understand that, but it would deny programming for students.
So will teachers then get support in having to do that with 5 weeks? Is there going to be professional development, or is there a way to adapt that 6-week cycle to accommodate for that 5-week section? I guess
Yes, we can talk. Okay, we can talk more about that in curriculum because there are a couple of ways forward. I apologize. I didn't understand your question at the beginning.
I'm pretty good at doing that, so.
But now I'm hearing you. I do want to point out, we did get feedback that was incorporated in this via Let's Talk and during our public meeting about having a full day of caregiver conferences, having for secondary, and that is incorporated in this calendar in the fall. We couldn't make both days full days. So in getting feedback in collaboration from other unions, we chose the fall to have the full day early on.
I also want to take the opportunity, is anybody else speaking? My apologies. I want to take the opportunity to mention one of our Ithaca High School students, Varun, who has been asking us multiple times about the holiday of Diwali and working with New York State senators to try to have that day be recognized as a statewide holiday as well. We are not in a position at this point in time to do that, but I want to recognize the work, the persistence with which this young person is bringing the concern to us. And so I want to thank them and acknowledge that even while we at this point in time are not moving forward. And I have also offered to help support their legislative advocacy at the state level. And I'm sure other folks may want to join that as well. But it felt important to acknowledge in this space.
And Mary, on this draft that we currently have, March 13th caregiver conference days are listed as full days. So that's going to be a half day for Boynton DeWitt and IHS then. Is that right? That's correct. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for working on the caregiver conference piece. I feel like that's one of those things that we brought up with you, and quite quickly you turned around and found a resolution. So there were a lot of people that were asking about that, and I really appreciate the swiftness and responsiveness to that concern. I feel like we're just like throwing random ideas at you to some extent here. So tell me, but if we shortened, if we shortened the February break by 2 days and didn't do a full week, I guess, is that possible if people were more eager to have a longer December break? Karen says no.
Possible. We've been trying to shorten that break for a while at times, and
Like,
never been successful.
but maybe if we were like, you could have 2 more
Yeah.
days in December.
Then we'd have people complain.
Well, I want to bear in mind that the calendar can always be reviewed. Should not be, and we got great feedback last year about giving people time to plan once the calendar's been adopted. But it is possible for us to adopt and continue to look at it and do something else. But I just want to make sure that we know that when we did it, when we made changes in the middle of the year, folks were not happy with that either.
So we can definitely do that and experience the feedback loop. We can do that. I would also say, I would just recommend, if doing that we move the second half, because the New Year falls on the first half this year, February break.
I would recommend keeping the calendar as is.
Me too, because I do recall, sorry, President, did I interrupt?
No, you did not.
I do recall we had a.
Hold on, is Todd already starting to lobby for the position? Go ahead. You're fine. We're good.
No, I do recall we had a 3-day February break a few years ago, and we had complaints over that. And one of the reasons why, like groups in New York State were stressing that students need that break, because that's when your high season of colds and flus and everything like that. And it's a good opportunity for the district to just thoroughly clean the buildings too.
Plant shut down, yeah.
Well, I was going to suggest that we just give people new things to complain about every year and maybe try it next year, but I saw our ITA representatives being like, yes, we definitely need that. So I'm just gonna let it die right there.
I want to jump in, if I may, and just say I do really appreciate the amount of feedback and engagement we got on the calendar process, and especially, Erin, your comment and mention of instructional needs of students in the comments that reflected that, such as M-Class, is definitely something I greatly appreciated in centering of students in this conversation. So thank you.
Are we all set, board colleagues, for a vote? Fantastic. I hope folks recognize that we do read the feedback. We do discuss the feedback as evidenced by hopefully this conversation. And with all that being said, we'll call the question. All in favor of adopting the calendar as presented? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Mary, for all your work. Greatly appreciated. We have one last agenda item for this evening. And that is to have a conversation about heating and cooling at Ithaca High School. I did see that a special guest has arrived. We thank them for their travel to be here. Jill, I'll try to set the stage and let me know if I'm misspeaking at any point in time. This is a conversation that is arising both out of the Facilities Committee as well as a meeting that we refer to as OACM, which is Owners, Architects, Construction and Management Firm. This conversation is in preparation, possible preparation for a December capital project that the district is considering. And that includes particular thinking about some of the HVAC systems here at Ithaca High School and the options, and probably much more importantly, the costs of what may be possible. So board members were sent the slide deck from the last Facilities Committee meeting. You were sent minutes to that conversation at discussion as well. I would love to invite Chris to come down and join us and answer any questions that folks may have, and or if folks need a refresher about what should happen. We realize that there's a lot of information and go from there. And Jill, please add.
We are at a time crunch here. Decisions need to be made because construction is underway that will lead to one path or another. So we really need to give Tetra Tech and other people who are involved some specifics as to which way the board would like them to proceed.
So our goal this evening is not necessarily a vote, but see if the board can come to some form of consensus about how to head in a direction, given that one project impacts another project, which impacts another project, and where we find ourselves.
Thank you for having me. I'll start with a question about where you'd like me to start in the explanation of this. And I guess the first question is, would you like a background of why we're having this conversation in this moment, or cut to the chase and start talking about dollars? And yeah, happy to.
Climate change next. No, I'm just messing with you.
Any questions off the bat? No, okay. Okay. As a basis, we have been talking about cooling Ithaca High School. This is a little background about the areas that have been cooled. So the orange areas prior to 2019 were receiving cooling. As a result of the capital project vote in 2019, y'all have probably noticed you've been doing some work around the district. In what we've called phase one, there were significant renovations to areas A and J to relocate the Welcome Center to the sort of natural entrance of where those visitors come from. And those two areas were furnished with cooling at that time. The blue area is what we're talking about now that we intend to cool in what we're calling phase three, for which construction is underway. We are having a conversation about cooling because we had planned for the lake source cooling system, which Cornell University has constructed and has been operating since about the year 2000, and from which Ithaca High School has been receiving cooling from that same time. So for about 25 years, you've been receiving the cooling for Ithaca High School that you have been receiving through this lake source cooling system. It's, I did a fairly quick Google search, and I'm not aware of a system like this anywhere else. It's a pretty unique system. Cornell University made an agreement with Ithaca City School District at the time because between the lake and Cornell University's campus, is about, I don't know, half a mile or so of Ithaca City School District owned property. And so there was an agreement made to confer an easement to Cornell University so they could put two 42-inch diameter pipes across, your property. And in return, you received have been receiving a certain amount of cooling from that system at a very efficient and I would say also pretty economical rate. That per the agreement that Ithaca City School District has with Cornell University, you will be allowed to draw a certain amount of cooling that is described as 400 tons. A ton in this case is a unit of HVAC measurement in BTUs and stuff. I'm using that number because later on that will become an important number for reference. And you'll be able to use that for so long as the lake source cooling system is in use. Cornell has invested quite a bit of money 25 years ago, so we're not aware of them at this point, ceasing their usage of that system. But what has changed is the Department of Environmental Conservation has scrutinized the permits that Cornell University has to operate this system and have notified, it's my understanding, they've notified Cornell that they may not expand the cooling of that system. And so the district received notification from Cornell that conversely, the expansion that we were planning to help cool the rest of Ithaca High School could not move forward with the lake source cooling system. So that's why we're now looking for other solutions to cool the building. Okay. Questions so far? Okay. So we embarked on a comparison. Okay, how else are we going to provide cooling? And we're going to talk about two options. The first option, I'll call it the boxes, right? You've got your traditional and what we anticipate to be the lowest first cost solution, which is a cooling tower and natural gas boilers. They're boxes. The cooling tower cools, the boilers heat. That is the baseline that we're using for a life cycle cost comparison that I'll explain in the upcoming slides.
And the cooling tower runs off of?
Electricity. You've got thank you. Electricity for the cooling tower, natural gas, obviously for the boilers. One of the things that we will see in the analysis that we didn't quite anticipate the impact of was the relative cost of those two fuel sources. Electricity is about, to achieve the same sort of BTUs, the same heating, is about 7 times as expensive as natural gas. Okay, so when we're doing the comparison, that was one of the cost of the energy is one of the factors that's very significant in this analysis. The option that we're comparing it to is a ground source heat pump. That system can heat and cool with one system. Okay, we anticipate that we will be able to take advantage of an aquifer that has been found at the Science Center. If you're familiar with that, they've been using that as part of their system since I think the late 1990s. There's also a recent pilot study over by Aldi and the DMV in that area to do a district geothermal system. And so there's some data from that as well that leads us to believe this aquifer is relatively reliable. All right, so I'm going to start going through numbers to compare the different options that we analyzed to compare to one another. Okay, so remember that 400 tons you've been getting? Ithaca High School needs about 1,000 tons to cool the whole place. All right, so the first option is add the 600 tons so you can cool the whole building. That is called Ithaca High School with lake source cooling. So lake source cooling remains in place, you continue to use it, and you augment it with your own system. The next one is 1,000 tons. That is, as you might guess, let's just cool all of Ithaca High School and not rely on the system that we don't have control over. Okay, so we looked at that as an option. In discussions, we realized that there is, or there may be some advantage because you have a campus with 2 relatively large buildings on it, not very far away from one another, Boynton Middle School, Ithaca High School. If you invested in a geothermal system, the wells for which might likely be sort of between those 2 buildings, let's consider providing cooling to Boynton Middle School as well for a nominal upsize of that system. Okay, so we looked at that. So that represents the 950 tons, which is Boynton's about 350 tons plus the 600 for Ithaca High School. Keep the lake source cooling in effect. That gets you all the cooling. The fourth and final option is, again, let's forget about the lake source cooling and just provide a system that Ithaca City School District can independently cool and heat both of those buildings. Does that make sense so far? Small, medium, large, extra large? Okay. So when we entered this analysis, we knew that the traditional boxes was going to be the lowest first cost. It's a traditional system. Geothermal would be more expensive. So we did some analyses with our friends at Campus Construction Management who assisted us with some cost estimating on this. So this represents the first cost. So you'll see in the parentheses, first cost. So that's when you're doing construction. We're not thinking about energy usage over time yet, just first cost up front. So starting at around 3.4 million for the least expensive, smallest system. That's your cooling tower plus gas boilers, so the boxes, at the smallest size, 600 tons. And you can, as the systems get larger, they get more expensive, seems relatively intuitive. We know also that the ground source heat pumps, we thought were going to be more expensive, and the estimates bear that out. And that delta varies from about $400,000 up to a little bit over $1 million, depending on the size. Okay, so that's the final line there is a comparison. So this is the net savings over a 30-year period. Okay, so up at the top it says 30-year life cycle analysis. This is where we get into analyzing these two systems over time. So the net savings over 30 years, our data shows that the 600-ton system using the ground source heat pump, that GSHP is ground source heat pump. So using that ground source heat pump system, we anticipate that over the 30 years, you'd save $160,000 relative to the more traditional boxes. Okay. When we go to the 1,000-ton, we see a negative in front of that number. A couple of the dynamics that explain that. There's a higher first cost, of course, it's a bigger system. The more heating we do with the ground source heat pump system, we're using that expensive electricity to do our heating as compared to a relatively inexpensive natural gas to do that heating. So we're seeing a really interesting sort of dynamic happening when we analyze it over 30 years. Okay. Conversely, then when we go to the third column, which is adding in Boynton, the ground source heat pump system, we estimate, will save you money over that 30-year period. And similarly, when we go to the largest system, it's about $100,000. I want to say at this time that these estimates are very high level. We have not designed the systems in any amount of detail. We're making a lot of assumptions. We're trying to be conservative. What I would like to say about these numbers is that we try to understand them relative to one another. Are you going to be in the whole $1,000 or $100,000 or $50,000 or $75,000? The accuracy is like dependent on a lot of big assumptions, but we've made those assumptions across the board. So we think that comparing these scenarios to one another is still very useful in terms of making a comparative analysis, which is what we're talking about this evening. That makes sense so far?
Are these costs including usage as well, right? So just take the third column, for example, right? A $435,000 possible net savings. Does it include the electricity usage as well as paying for gas?
Yes.
Sort of making some presumptions about what those costs would be as well.
Correct.
Okay.
So we've used a industry standard tool. It's created by the Department of Energy. And there are a lot of like industry standard assumptions built into the analysis. I believe we also used as specific as New York State data for some of the energy usage. But so yes, like,
What are you using for the annual increase for electricity costs?
I don't know that number offhand. That's the creators of that program got out their crystal ball and they, you know, made some assumptions about what they thought energy was going to be. And so we just used those assumptions. But again, they're across the board, they're the same assumption. That answer your question?
It doesn't, because you didn't
Yeah.
answer, but.
Well, we don't.
But you don't have the answer.
We don't know what energy is going to cost.
Because I think like as a district, we're projecting 10% next year, like in our budget. I believe that was the number. So I'm just curious of like what this model is, because, you know, as you know, if the model's 5% and we're projecting 10% or 10% is the actual number, it impacts the potential savings.
Yeah,
that we
for
could be
sure.
having these different systems. So
Absolutely.
I think, you know, knowing that that key factor is important to these calculations.
I'm sure we could get back to you with
Okay,
that number.
thank you.
But yeah, good question. All right. Other questions before we?
I mean, just to be clear, this is part of a capital project, meaning this is where we were just talking about fund balance and all these things earlier. This would come out of the capital project, which is reimbursed 0.58 cents per dollar, correct?
For yes.
Okay.
And that, not to get too off topic, but that capital project bond vote is a separate item from your annual budget, both in vote and in terms of like the pots of money. So. All right.
More numbers.
More numbers. So I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but so I'll go back for a second. This slide considers only dollars. The other factor that this life cycle cost analysis program allows us to look at is environmental impact. So that's a combination of energy usage, but also where you're getting that energy from. Okay, so your electrical grid in New York State is actually relatively clean compared to a national average. There's a lot of hydro, a lot of other things in the mix, versus natural gas, which is fossil fuels, which is, you know, has a different profile of emissions, right? So when we look at the emissions, we understand that the ground source heat pump system, as we expected, has a lower environmental footprint, and this quantifies that. Okay, so like I said before, the cost of energy, sorry, let's start again. The ground source heat pump system will use less energy. The cost of that energy, because it's all electricity, is much higher in some cases. So what this analysis does is crunch all those numbers, because it's not immediately apparent to us, like, you know, is the higher cost of the higher relative cost of electricity going to be more than the energy savings we get in electricity by going to a more efficient system? It's hard to tell. And that's why we did this, right? And so the numbers show that when you go to the ground source heat pump, you know, at the bottom couple rows, I was trying to find some metric that folks can understand. It's like 49 or 55 or 67 or 78 cars being taken off the road over a 30-year period.
Each year?
For 30 years, over 30 years. So divide that by 30 if you want to.
All right, so it's cumulative? So
It's cumulative.
Okay.
Yes, that's why it says 30 years in the parentheses. So there is an environmental benefit. You can think about, you know, millions of kilograms of, you know, CO2, or, you know, we equate it to cars and things. So,
Can I ask one?
Yeah,
quick one?
absolutely.
I just don't understand that one. Go.
Yeah.
So 78 cars, do you mean like 2 point something cars a year, or 78 cars every year times 30
the
years?
former.
Okay.
No, yeah,
So couple cars a year.
correct. every year for 30 years.
But when we talk about electricity, Chris, and I mean, in the past, we've also talked about utilizing more solar energy. So if in the future we look to, as a school district, more solar farms, and we're talking about electricity, that there's more like the electricity we would use for the ground source heat pump, could that be offset by potentially investing in solar energy as time goes on?
Yes.
Okay. So there's more factors that are on the sheet as time goes on than we can really predict as well. Is that?
That's fair. So my first question, hopefully clarifying question, question is the decision moving forward to be based solely on cost, or is it to consider also environmental impact? If it is based solely on cost, you would say, all right, well, we're going to go with the very lowest first cost, 3.4 million for the traditional boxes. That's one way of looking at it. Right? If you want to look at the option that provides the biggest relative savings over the life cycle, I would suggest you look at the 1,000-ton with the traditional boxes. When we see the negative 525 for the geothermal system, means you're spending more on geothermal. It means you're spending less in the traditional system. So you can think of the opposite as well. So you could say, okay, if we do this 1,000-ton system, we will be over the 30 years, to the good by about $500,000. Right. So that's another way to think about it. If you are to decide to use this traditional system, you get none of the environmental benefits that we're talking about on the bottom half of this slide, because those are relative to the base case. Okay. If you were using a combination of life cycle cost and emissions, you would look at these two, the 600-ton and the 950-ton systems as your best option. So question is about the basis of your decision-making, what factors you want to consider.
You want to go ahead, Todd?
Yeah, I'm curious, because one thing that came up for me that's not in this model is what would be the benefit to Cornell to be able to have this additional capacity? Like, could we go to them and say, hey, you're able to cool at whatever cost? Like, is there a monetary value? We go to them and say, hey, if you give us $1 million, we'll get off your system. And then we could factor that into, being completely independent from that system.
Yes, you could.
Yeah.
400 tons could be another building for Cornell.
Right. So, I mean, I think if we are going to consider it, I think we should try to quantify like what that value is, go to Cornell and be like, hey, do you guys want to buy this capacity off us? So just something to think about.
They might do a similar analysis as this.
Yeah.
They have a system in place. They could cool it. If they have to go to an alternative system, what's the relative upcharge? And that could be a basis for decision.
And what's the turnaround time on having that conversation to keep our processes moving forward? It's a brilliant idea. I'm trying to.
Yeah. So that I have follow-up questions with that is like, how quickly do we need to make this decision?
Yesterday. No, soon, right?
Very soon, because decisions are being made, as I understand it, daily about plumbing at the high school. What kinds of fittings should go in, though it's different depending on the kind of system you're planning for. So if we want to avoid, redoing a lot of work.
Well, yeah. Well, how much life do we have left on the current system? Like what? Because to me, do we need to make this, like, I'm hearing you say it needs to be ASAP, but if, why? Just because we're investing like some small amount of that, I don't want to trivialize it, but we're investing money in fittings or pipes.
The urgency is, so we've bid work that was based on being able to use the lake source cooling system. And so we've designed the mechanical piping system to assume that there was going to be a large heat pump chiller in your boiler room. If we go with a different system, we need to tell the contractors who have bid that work, we're going to ask you to make these changes. We've put them on hold for some time while we've been trying to make this decision and, do some math and quantify the differences between different options. And so that's the urgency, is to inform contractors who are being relatively patient with us all as we seek to make another decision, that regardless of the decision we make, we will need to make some changes.
The other factor, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, the other factor is that if we choose to go with the current system for heating, the gas boilers, some of them are approaching the end of their natural life.
Yep.
And they will be extremely expensive to replace. And at some point, probably difficult to maintain.
That was gonna be my question. What do we think about maintenance costs?
Yeah, that was.
So we have the life cycle cost analysis does include maintenance costs on an annual basis, and it includes the replacement of boilers that we know are going to be aging out within this 30-year period. So that was included in this analysis.
Okay.
Does it include inflation and
Yes.
market? Really?
As best as-
Even with the current like trends of,
Their assumptions are made.
okay.
Yeah.
When did they bid it, or when did they make those assumptions?
Well, the contractors bid the work about a year and a couple months ago.
So is it safe to assume that those numbers are gonna go up significantly?
These numbers? Or-
The contractors bid, I mean.
Oh, no,
They already
they've bid it
purchased-
and we've accepted it, and they've been doing work for a year, throughout this building. So what we're talking about is a credit change order to do less piping and change it over here and do things like that. The quantity of that change is, I think, much, much less significant than the quantity of the new systems that we're talking about. So that's not of primary concern. It's mostly, we'd like to get them direction so that they can move on with the project.
Yeah, I think my question was more along the lines of, we have pricing here, with bid estimates or, assumptions for, like a geothermal system would cost.
Mm.
But, when was the last time those numbers are updated? Like, do you think that what we're seeing here, because this presentation, I think I saw this like a month ago or 2 months ago or whatever, has the market changed? And by the time we actually go to contract, which would be a year or two from now, like, where do we forecast those numbers to actually be?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So and the reason I'm saying this, because my concern is, I mean, if we have another 10 years of life left, right? Like, based on like the uncertainty in the markets, I think it might be prudent just to not do this system, allow things to kind of like shake out and figure out where pricing is actually going to be. I think right now is not, well, I guess, when would we go into bid? Getting ahead of myself.
When would we go to bid with this capital project?
Yeah.
So if you have a successful vote come December, that this scope of work would be part of. And you chose that this scope of work was the first one that we do, we could probably be bidding, late 2028, say.
And the numbers that you have on here are based on previous assumptions for 2028.
This has not been escalated out, I believe, multiple years. This is like present dollars at the
Okay.
moment.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's good
so
to know.
this is not escalated. Yeah.
I mean, if to move this forward in some sort of way, I mean, I know we're talking about money and it's tight and we've just said that, but this capital project funds are kind of separate and different. And we also, are trying to think of our students and our scholars and their wants and needs, and their wants and needs are like environmental, like climate change is an issue. And so, there's a responsibility on us to do right by our students in this one. And that's kind of where I'm struggling. Like, okay, bottom dollar there, but also this is investing in their future. And I like getting something that is gas boilers. I mean, those are hopefully going to be obsolete, right? When we're speaking about environmental changes. I guess I look to my colleagues who've been in these facilities meetings, like what are your feelings in all of the discussions that you've had?
We've heard a bit of Todd's thinking. I'm sure Karen will share hers. I guess like you, Aaron, I would like to see us make some investment in environmental sustainability with this big project. And I thought the costs were reasonably close across the options. I like the idea of continuing our involvement with lake source cooling. That is an environmentally friendly option, and it's in place. I have expressed before my dismay that the CO2 reduction isn't massive. We were all kind of shocked that it wasn't a more significant difference. Now, others, Arlen, for example, might say, "Are you kidding? This is a lot." Yeah, that's why we're here. It's tricky stuff, and I believe Chris would tell you your choice depends on what you're valuing at any given point in time. So it's not like he or I or anyone can give you a clear, this is the option to choose. You have to weigh everything.
Chris, maybe you can weigh in. I always understood, and I could be completely wrong because it's not my area of expertise, that natural gas does not produce a lot of CO2, which is why originally, everyone was moving towards natural gas because the cost, and it didn't create a lot of CO2, but it creates a lot of methane gas, which impacts the ozone layer like at a faster rate than CO2, but it then doesn't stay around as long as CO2. So that's kind of like am I wrong with that? Because you're right, the impact of CO2 is not that significant, but it's because natural gas doesn't actually produce a lot of CO2.
I don't have figures in my head about the relative impact from CO2 on methane emissions versus CO2. Assuming you're comparing to like coal or other fossil fuels that we're burning. So I'm sorry, I don't have those numbers.
Yeah, fair
in my hand in terms of like the greenhouse gas.
Yeah,
or potential for that.
And I want to hear Karen's think as well, but can we make, and looking at these numbers, I'm wondering if we can presume that the environmental impact, those numbers may not change over a 30-year span, but the costs have the opportunity to change significantly in one direction or another. Is that a fair question? Right? Like we've run the numbers of what the emissions may be in the CO2, no matter what the market is doing and what tariffs are doing, whatever else, that those numbers may be, for the most part, relatively consistent, no matter what takes place. But the cost could change radically for whatever system even we decide at this point in time, right? Like maybe heat pumps now have $1,000 or 1,000% tariff on them because they come from someplace else.
That's true. The energy, if I understood your statement, the energy use we anticipate we feel more confident about the amount of energy that will be used than we feel confident about how much that energy will cost 5, 10, or 30 years from now.
Yep. Karen, would you want to share, given as a member of the facilities?
Just a reminder, as Chris had asked, or someone had mentioned something about the values that we have. And back in 2019, we made a commitment to cool IHS, and we want to continue with that. Last year, the Climate Action Justice Group came with their resolution that we want to continue to fulfill as a district as we proceed and look at the future. So therefore, if we're limited with the lake source cooling, we have to, it would behoove us to go with the other options that we have outlined here. And where I see it as a benefit to connect Boynton Middle School in the process.
Other comments, board members, questions?
Well, I would also want to make a decision based on the environment, keeping that in mind. Um, I agree with, I guess, what other board members have said also, though, just that the surprisingly low environmental impact. I mean, I'm not sure how to measure it or relativize it. It just seems like 2 cars a year for 30 years. I mean, I don't know what that just doesn't feel like a lot. I mean, I'm just thinking it's like if one person just changed their car from, gas, if we took $200,000 and paid 2 people, I mean, I'm being funny, but so it just doesn't seem like that much. It is also, though, I guess, there's some symbolism in it if we choose not to, um, pick the option that's environmentally friendly. It's sort of like what the district would then be affirming would be not to do that. So I think that's just in my mind. Like it's hard for me to say, like, I'm going to pick the less environmental friendly option. So just to put that out. I think the other thing I just wanted to say was when we think about the cost, I think when these projects get passed, my understanding is that um, the community is approving us to borrow this money. When we borrow the money, if we borrow it at a certain rate, we keep a certain percentage of our budget for debt, which usually in the past has been about 7%. So whether, we would have to spend, I guess, we could spend, we'd have to not spend a lot of money to make the 7% go down a significant amount that we would feel it in the district. So like when we decide to do a $4 million project, it's not like taking $4 million out of the general budget. We're spreading it over time. It's coming out of debt service. So we can afford to borrow some money to do the projects. So I just wanted to say that because that's how we have to think about it. It's not like when we're planning budget and saying we need to come up with $3 million to pay, somebody or something like that. So I don't know if any of that helps, but I guess I'm just articulating what I'm thinking about.
So by way of process and next steps, I mean, one next step would obviously be, I think, I don't know what the timing would be or how it would even happen, but to have a conversation, as I understood it, to ask Cornell, what would it be like if, I mean, I also heard Jill saying liking to hold on to lake source cooling, though we do know there are environmental folks in Ithaca who don't believe in lake source cooling as well. But to ask Cornell, like, okay, if we were to give this back to you, is there some sort of financial arrangement? That's one possible next step. Another possible next step is, again, my apologies, but following Todd is to say, let's just let for things to whatever settle. Or another is we know that this is going to have to happen soon. And my worry is that the longer, and I don't know what I believe, which one of these, but my worry is that the longer we wait, the only thing that's going to happen is costs are going to continue to increase. Like I don't foresee a future where costs will decrease. And I could be wrong about that. I hope I am. But like if we wait 4 years, then it may be double the money as opposed to if we waited 2 years to get it bid or do whatever.
Require air conditioning as much as it looks like it's going to require.
Or a situation where it actually requires more air conditioning on more days, especially given statewide mandates that are requiring heat control, right, and cooling of spaces. But yeah, I'm with you on all that. Or we find out natural gas is going away in 3 years and we didn't know it, we were lying to people.
I mean, I'll say my first impulse was to say, well, let's put this whole thing on hold. That was my first impulse, but I think you're correct, Sean. I think things are just going to get more and more expensive. And we've already got a couple of years at least lead time before this comes to fruition. It's not like cooling is going to start in these areas 6 months from now, no matter what we do.
And I could offer a third option as well on the 22nd or fifth option or sixth option. On April 22nd, there is a facilities committee meeting that this could be brought up and ask board members to give their thoughts. Am I using the right date? Right. April 22nd is facilities first and then a special board meeting. So saying to board members that maybe we don't have to make a decision this evening or some direction, but maybe by the 22nd to have some idea which direction we want to head if we're trying to get these things, especially in place for a December capital project vote.
Except that our big questions won't be answered on the 22nd.
But it may give board members a minute to sit with it before
Okay.
trying to digest all this information if this is the first time they're seeing it. I'm with you about trying to move things along. I hear that. But I also want folks to feel like they have time to be informed and ask some questions.
I would appreciate that. And also, while we're talking, I'm just kind of looking and trying to figure out, I think that taking 78 like looking at the options, taking 78 cars off the road over 30 years might have a bigger impact than we realize. I think that number feels small to us, but in just some basic research, I hope that maybe, I might try to do a deep dig into that, because I think that means a lot more than what we're seeing. Because when you look at the bigger numbers of and I'm trying to find the slide, I think the environmental impact is much bigger than 78 cars. I think we don't really perceive that well. But when you look at the actual emissions, that number is more significant. I think that we just don't quite get 78 cars and how much pollution cars really do give when you think about average. So Chris, if you can, I would like to know before we make this decision, when we talk about 78 cars average, right? What does that mean? That means emissions driving every single day. I'm not asking you for this now, but whatever numbers, whatever algorithms, I think that number probably is much more substantial than we realize.
The method that I used is in the footnote of the slide. There's an EPA tool that we used that assumes that converts kilograms of emissions of CO2 into many different other metrics. So that's where I got those numbers. Could I also add another factor that is not at all included in this analysis, but if I think I heard some comments to the effect of cooling Ithaca High School or not cooling Ithaca High School at this time. There's a growing body of research, I'll let you do the research, about the impact of heat on student performance, especially test taking. So I believe that to be part of the basis of the governor's concern about temperature as it relates to education. But that's a whole nother factor that is outside of this, just to.
Yep, it's a fact.
Bring that up.
Clarifications. And sorry if you said this and I missed it, but I mean, I think Todd's idea is a really good one. But what are the costs or technical problems associated with having one building heated by two different systems, or are there none?
Building heated by two different
Sorry, cooled by two different systems. Cooled. So in other words, if you have half of Ithaca High School using lake source and half of it using the heat pump, is that a problem or not?
No, we can work that out.
I mean, but are there any efficiencies or savings to having be all one system? I know you can work it out, but is there like long-term maintenance or operating savings of not having two systems, one building to maintain?
That's a good question. I would say that if you maintain the lake source cooling as your option, generally that's going to cause you the least amount of maintenance, the least amount of attention to be paid to that capacity for cooling, because it's largely Cornell doing it.
Oh, okay.
Like they're operating their system.
Even here?
There's that brick building, I'm turned around, out by Lake Street. That includes a piece of equipment that takes that water and then brings it into Ithaca High School and so you control up to, a certain point there.
Okay.
But it's pipes and it's a relatively easy piece of equipment to maintain. It's called a heat exchanger. So that's relatively simple.
Okay.
If we were to use two systems, we would combine those in the boiler room and then send it to the building just as cold water. The building doesn't really see where the cold water is coming from.
Okay.
And we can combine that. That's a good question.
All right. So not really an issue is what
It's
you're saying.
not, yeah,
Okay.
we don't think it's a significant issue.
How do we want to proceed, board?
Can I just make one quick comment about the methane? Just to
The
clarify.
answer is no.
No, I mean, just a quick Google search. Over a 20-year period, methane is roughly 80 times more potent than CO2. So the lifespan, it lasts in the atmosphere to 10 or 12 years, methane does, where CO2 lasts, maybe like 100 or more. But the methane, it traps heat a lot more. So methane heats the earth at a much, much higher rate than CO2 does. So I don't think saving 2 cars makes any difference, but it's really, I think it's the methane impact of getting off natural gas. But
So
you guys-
this would be an argument of not using natural gas boilers.
Correct, correct. And people always think of CO2 and they think of like, global warming and stuff, but methane has like it's much more harmful. I mean, this says it's, 80 times more potent, but it's a shorter lifespan. So just, I just wanted to clarify that.
Right.
In our electrical system, I said earlier, we have a lot of hydro, but a lot of electrical power plants are powered by natural gas. And so it gets very complicated, but
Yeah.
I think you're onto another very interesting factor,
Yeah, sorry to get in the weeds, but yeah, or no, it's North Campus. Yeah. Same issue. Yeah.
I'm open. Yep.
I just had one last thing. Just since we're thinking about all this and we're putting it out there, just the factor of it, having a cool school is very nice, obviously for students and teachers and all the staff that are working there. I know it's a luxury, but since we're looking at it at all the different angles, that is something to consider if we have an opportunity to do that. Obviously not if it's cost prohibitive, but still something to think about.
Yeah, I have to, I don't really think it's a luxury anymore with climate change and we go to school through June. It's a necessity. And that's why,
We have summer schools.
yeah, it's gotta be addressed.
For me, and I'm not trying to minimize the numbers, right? We're talking about a $500,000 difference, but to Abner's point, a $500,000 spread out over 30 years with building aid also coming back makes it much more palatable to me. And especially if, depending on what the interest is of going out in the bond to do this, seems like it could be a solid investment. And I don't know who said it, but in the values that we're trying to support as well. So for 30 years, a $500,000 to support values and also let students know that we're hearing them, listening to our, what's it called? The GOAT Club. Is that what I remember it being, right? Like I could be convinced that that would be a good way to go. I do have the question about whether or not we want to run our own system or continue with lake source cooling. I tend to probably lean towards what Jill was saying, like it's already there. Let's take advantage of what we currently have, especially if Cornell is going to be responsible for its maintenance and upkeep. And then to sort of do a smaller geothermal pump, but I still have questions about geothermal as well. But
I mean, we're having issues with that currently. So,
I think that's right, Sean.
say again.
I think that's right.
So what do we want to do? Let's
Ready to say something.
that's why I'm like this, Karen. Yes, Chris, please.
If we want to have a discussion about geothermal systems relative, assuming you're talking about Enfield, Todd, when you bring this up.
Yes.
And I want to be clear that the issues with the heating system at Enfield are not related to the geothermal well field. That has been performing relatively well since it was installed. The issues have to do with stuff inside the building that frankly are the same unit ventilators and piping and valves and similar dynamics as in this building and basically all of your buildings. So we think of the Enfield geothermal heating system as such, but it's really a heating system. And it has a geothermal feature, which is not the part of that system that's been causing the difficulties.
Thank you for clarifying.
Jill, as the chair of facilities, and Chris, as the architect who's helping us think about these things, would give board members giving you input by April 22nd be problematic?
No, it's great.
Chris says no. No, fine with me. I'll just go on record and saying, I think the choice is do you want to do this or not? And if you want to do this, it seems to me that the clearest choice is the third one here.
Lake source cooling and Boynton.
Most relatively, and it makes the most sense to me intuitively, but yeah, we can and will wait as long as
Well,
we need.
before we decide to just wait, it seems like a lot of people have shook their head at that. I want to make sure that like that would make it so that nobody has to look up about the we would definitely be going the more like economical, no, not economical, environmental route. So I just want to make sure like people have questions that and research that they actually want to do before that next meeting, or do we let's just make sure that enough people don't feel ready now.
Well, let me say it differently then, that listening to the folks here, if there seems to be some folks aligning around option number 3, doesn't mean that everyone is there. If there is strong resistance to that, let it be known by the 22nd. Maybe that's the better way of operating as opposed to give your feedback, right? Like we'll plan on going down this path unless something else comes up, and then we'll challenge that. But the question is, we need to move in a direction. So if we want to restart the entire conversation, then let's do that as well. But maybe not at 10 o'clock at
I
night.
guess I'm asking alternatively, like, could we just vote on it right now and not wait till anything for the 22nd?
What are we voting on?
Well, does anyone need additional time to decide? John says yes.
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
Okay.
April 22nd is Earth Day.
Isn't it?
So don't pick number 1.
Is that okay by folks? Are we, and Joe, I mean, may not work for everybody, but that's the path that we'll go to give people time to do their own research and do some things. Chris, we can write to you in the facilities committee with any questions we may have. And I know there's an OACM on Thursday. That work? If that works for everybody, thank you for working through that conversation. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for working through all of our conversations today. We will bring the meeting to a close and we will see everyone on the 22nd. Have a good break, good folks.